The main gates of the Illiston mansion were sealed with a red tree that was said to devour people. No matter what people did, they disappeared without a trace, but the tree could not be destroyed, and this story had been going on for 300 years. The heroine had been looking for this particular tree for a long time, and she finally managed to find it. It was simply incredible. At the gates of the mansion there really was that very red tree, about which there were terrible legends. One morning earlier, a young servant carrying washing water for his master suddenly disappeared without a trace. The disappearance was not the only one the next day. A servant who decided to go shopping also disappeared. Then the coachman who had come for the Duke disappeared without a trace, as if he had dissolved into thin air. Even the secretary who was supposed to arrive from the capital also disappeared without a trace, leaving only his clothes in place. Every day the master was informed about the mysterious disappearance of servants and other people, and today the same thing happened. The gentleman's assistant reported that today, the young gentleman's private teacher disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only his clothes. The gentleman, racking his brains, could not understand what had begun to happen in his mansion, and it was definitely something mystical. No matter how much these incidents were investigated, it was never possible to establish the cause, as long as time in the estate flowed as usual. One day, the Duke of Illiston noticed that a small, thin tree, which had once sprouted unnoticed at the entrance to the estate, had, unnoticed by anyone, outgrown the fence and rushed upward. He asked Lennon's assistant if he knew what kind of tree it was, but he didn't know anything about plants and couldn't tell him anything. Lennon suggested asking the gardener, but the Duke refused, and since the assistant did not know the name of the tree, it really was not important. He simply noted that in any case, the tree did not look very pleasant and asked that it be removed immediately along with the gardener as soon as the sun rose. The butler and the gardener had to carry out an important task and finally cut down the strange tree. The mysterious disappearances did not end there, and soon a servant arrived to the Duke and told him that the butler Lennon and the gardener had disappeared without a trace. In the garden, only their clothes were found lying on the grass again, and it was too strange to be true. People continued to disappear one after another, but everyone understood that they could not have fallen through the ground. Having lost those who had been with the Duke for many years, he was unable to hide his grief, but the worst thing was that he could not understand the reason. Not understanding what kind of mysticism was happening here, the Duke went to the window to look at that tree. The Duke felt an overwhelming fear, but also a kind of morbid curiosity. He could not tear his gaze away from the tree, as if he was enchanted by its ominous beauty. With each passing day, the changes became more and more noticeable. The color of the trunk darkened, turning into a crimson, almost bloody hue. The color of the bark became unnaturally bright. The silhouette of the tree seemed to tremble, distorted by invisible energy. The Duke, pale as a sheet with his assistant stumbling behind him, ran out of the castle to examine the ominous tree. The assistant, young and impressionable, turned even paler as soon as he looked at the monstrous plant. The Duke, although frightened, tried to keep his cool. He slowly approached, feeling the weight descend on his shoulders. Suddenly they heard sounds. The smell of rot and something sweet, cloying, hit their nose. And at that very moment, from the very trunk of the ominous tree, a human hand reached out to them, emaciated to the bones, with long, thin fingers, as if woven from dry branches. The Duke fell down in fear. He froze, paralyzed with fear, looking at the approaching hand. After this incident, the estates were sealed, but people still continued to disappear. No one could get rid of this tree, and one fine day, a girl with black hair and bright scarlet eyes appeared in front of the estate gates. Seeing that very tree, she realized that she had finally found the ominous magical plant about to enter through the estate gates. The heroine knew that if she had destroyed the tree immediately, her appearance would have been much more effective. In the deathly pale face, the eyes stood out in particular, suddenly flashing with a violet, unearthly light. This color was like the depths of amethyst, in which the stars of long-extinct galaxies seemed to be reflected. The gates trembled, as if awakening from a centuries-long sleep. Sparks of violet flame ran across their surface, repeating the color of her eyes. The cursed Illiston estate and the gates sealed for 300 years, through which no one could ever pass. The magical stranger was the first to overcome them, and with the help of magic she managed to open the gates to the estate. Once inside, the heroine was incredibly delighted with her impressive power, which could move mountains. The frightened assistant saw the stranger and shouted, wondering if she had managed to get through the main gate. The butler immediately asked the maid to inform the master about this, because the girl's appearance was too unexpected. They thought a little girl entered the estate alone through the main gate, and it was too unexpected. The gentleman and his butler asked the lady to sit down in the living room to discuss how she had managed to enter the territory. The butler admitted that the girl had indeed passed by the red tree at the gate, and it was probably worth listening to what she had to say. The Duke, whose name was Raytans or Ilestian, did not understand what a girl he knew absolutely nothing about could tell him. But she actually walked through the man-eating redwood that was the estate's first curse without receiving a scratch. No matter how much they thought, no one could believe that a fragile girl did this. The Duke turned to the girl and asked her name, pale skin, bright red eyes, and jet black hair, and this girl's name was Simone. She was not a noblewoman at all, and the Duke immediately decided to find out as many details about her as possible and asked her last name. He was informed that the girl had entered the estate through gates sealed with magical power, which no one had opened for many years. And probably she came here for a reason, so the Duke wanted to know the reason why the lady entered the territory. Simone stunned everyone with her answer, stating that she had come to offer them a fair deal that would benefit both parties. The butler cried out, "This is complete impudence, and even if this girl does not know the laws of the world, as a commoner she has no right to offer anything to the master himself." Simone had no intention of persuading anyone, and standing up, she confidently said that they could believe, or they could do what they wanted. With her eyes flashing brightly red as blood, the lady said in a mysterious voice that she would like to say one last thing to the Duke. Her magical eyes seemed to reflect the depths of hell. Simone declared that the Duke was forever damned. Looking at the Duke, she said that right now there was something hanging over his shoulder that had its skin gathered together, so it was impossible to tell whether it was a man or a woman. And it seemed that the entity had been living next to the Duke for a long time and had no intention of leaving. Her words, of course, sounded like the wild delirium of a crazy girl from the forest, and no one believed her right away. After this phrase, Simone went to the door, asked the Duke's permission to finally take her leave and simply leave. But suddenly he asked her to stay, saying that he would like to hear the continuation of the terrible story. The deal that Simone decided to propose to the Duke was very simple. The girl immediately admitted it. She promised to lift the terrible curse from this estate, but in return she wanted to receive something valuable for herself. Her only wish was for an unexpected proposal, and Simone asked to be raised on the ducal estate. The butler stopped saying anything at all after her words, because no one expected her to appear. Simone wanted to grow up on the ducal estate until she came of age. And this was the only condition of Simone, a 17-year-old girl with pale skin like a dead person who was a necromancer. But Simone used to be a completely different person, an ordinary office worker, a young lady named So Hyung-jin. One day she woke up in the body of a character from a cliched fantasy called "When I Woke Up, I Realized That I Was Hiding My Mysterious Power." The boys always teased the girl because of her blood-red eyes and threw stones at her, shouting that she looked simply disgusting. For some reason, Simone was always hated by everyone around her. She was constantly humiliated, so one day her parents abandoned her and simply ran away. When the boys threw stones at her, she closed her eyes and did not see the man standing in front of her at all. It was Simone's director, a stately lady with graceful features and a sharp chin. She asked Simone to follow her that day, and it was completely unknown what she had planned this time. The lady said that early in the morning a man came who wanted to meet Simone specifically and asked to find her. Simone lived in an orphanage her entire life, from early childhood, and no one had ever visited her before. Simone was asked to go out to the unknown young man, and the director declared that she was the same girl she had already spoken about. The director called her the one and only in the empire, and the young man was incredibly happy to see the lady. Since ancient times, black hair and red eyes were considered an ominous sign of those who made a pact with the devil. The headmistress had long wanted to get rid of the girl, deciding that she could help the society's research. At that moment, Simone didn't understand anything at all, but she knew one thing: she would finally be able to get out of this terrible place. The young man stated that the necromancer was being taken by the Occult Sciences Society, and he was ready to buy her for any amount of money. After this, Simone went to the secret research center of the Occult Sciences Society, and from that moment, a new chapter in her life began. She only hoped that her life could finally change, but she ended up in an even more terrible place, where one day her saviors appeared. This place was usually famous for its terrible rituals, where living people were sacrificed every time. Simone should also have been the victim of some spell, but since she had a truly devilish appearance, she was still alive. When unknown people arrived at this place, the young man noticed that there was a survivor among the captives. So Simone, saved at the last moment, set off on an adventure with the main character and his companions. She was a gifted child with the potential to become the most powerful necromancer in the world, but due to prejudice, she had to constantly suffer, living a life of discrimination and pain. But the end of Simone, who went on a journey with the main character of this novel, Abel, was far from the happiest. She was barely saved by the protagonist, but she turned out to be incredibly stupid and was willing to sacrifice her life for the sake of her comrades who once saved her. When she woke up, she couldn't believe why she had entered Simone, whose life was not so simple. The strangest gift is a sudden flash of vision that allows one to see what is hidden from the eyes of mere mortals, ghosts. The terrifying figure of the ghost circled above the girl's head and repeated only one word, "Die, die, die." Luckily, thanks to this guy who has been following Simone around, she seems to have gotten used to most of the ghosts. She just wanted to escape from the orphanage as quickly as possible before she was sold somewhere else, and the heroine resigned herself to the fact that at one moment she woke up as a necromancer. Leaving would have been foolish and reckless, and running away without a plan would have been quite dangerous. One evening, lying on her bed, Simone could not sleep, wondering where she should go. In fact, in her past life, she just got angry about working overtime, drank a can of beer, and read a generic webtoon, which turned out to be her biggest mistake. And pounding her fists in the air, the girl screamed that it would be better if she inhabited the body of a noble aristocrat so that she would never have any problems again. The idea of a noble aristocrat came unexpectedly, and she realized that this was her chance. The young necromancer had a fascinating idea, and there really is one way to become an aristocrat. An episode that played a big role in the middle of the first season was the incident with Simone's kidnapping with the help of the Duke. In order to lift the numerous curses placed on his family, the Duke, unbeknownst to Abel and his group, allegedly kidnaps Simone. However, in her past life, Simone was unable to do this because only a truly powerful necromancer could remove the curse. And at that moment, the girl had not yet awakened her abilities, so she could not help the Duke in any way. Even the only necromancer in the Empire could not lift the curse from the ducal family, and this fact drove Duke Illiston into deep despair. In the original, this young man was almost a villain, but at the same time a humane character who cared about his family and his servants. So now Simone decided that perhaps he could help her by offering to use her abilities, gradually lifting the curse. Simone didn't ask to be raised in any way, but wanted the largest room and food on the same level as the Duke. She warned that if they didn't like each other during the process, they could end the proposal at any time. The Duke was surprised that we could really terminate the contract so easily, and Simone understood that he was unlikely to trust her from the first seconds. She suggested that if either side didn't like the other's actions, they could simply stop cooperating. At that moment, Simone only prayed that the Duke would agree to make her an aristocrat and decided to promise one thing, that she would invest her whole life in this deal, where she would have to remove a strong curse because in reality she had nowhere else to go. Immediately after her words, the Duke was silent for a moment and asked the butler to bring something. The man brought out a book in a black velvet binding with gold embroidery, and in the center of this book was a magic stone. It was not just a book, but a manual that was passed down in the ducal family from generation to generation. The Duke heard that necromancers also have different levels, and not every one of them can remove the terrible curse. So before hiring Simone, he needed to make sure she had the skills to help. The Duke suggested that the girl start with the very first rule, which Simone was obliged to fulfill according to the contract. Firstly, it was forbidden to enter or exit through the main gate of the mansion. One could not even approach it, and the back entrance was used to exit to the street. The Duke approached the girl and warned her once again that if she disobeyed the most important rules, she would face severe punishment, and he won't even blink an eye to kill her, because she has already disappeared without a trace for everyone. For Simone, this was the only chance to become an aristocrat, which is what she wanted to achieve, so she asked the Duke to simply rely on her. From that day on, the young necromancer began to live in the Duke's estate, promising him to deal with the powerful curse. The first thing she asked the Duke for in order to get rid of the tree at the entrance forever, she had to follow the following rules. She planned to lift the curse in about a week and immediately informed the master of the deadline. And starting tonight, everyone in the mansion, including the Duke himself, had to go to bed early until Simon warned them that it was all over. The necromancer also needed a skilled man who was not related to the Illiston family, a good swordsman with skillful skills. It takes a skilled person to cut down a tree. Simone could cut it down herself, but she couldn't cope with this curse alone. The Duke was puzzled as to why a swordsman was needed to remove the curse, and why anyone from outside was needed at all. Simone said that this curse was placed on the mansion, so no one from his family would be suitable, and a stranger was needed, and she warned the Duke that he must go to bed early from that very night onwards. The necromancer already knew something about the curse of this family, and if her guess was correct, something unexpected would happen tonight. When all the objects of the curse fall asleep, the red tree will begin to move at night, and it will eat anyone who is not sleeping when it moves. The Duke could not believe the nonsense about the tree hunting people at night, and he listened to the stranger's words with surprise. The tree was first discovered by his family's ancestors about 300 years ago, and no one has approached it since then. In this case, Simone wondered why the tree still had a life of its own, and people in the mansion continue to disappear without a trace, and no one can find any explanation for this. That same evening, the maid went to show the new resident of the cursed mansion her new room. And as soon as Simone stepped over the threshold of her new home, she couldn't believe how lucky she was. The maid opened the door to an incredibly luxurious room, where it was impossible not to feel like a true aristocrat. The room was truly astounding, huge, with high ceilings decorated with intricate stucco. It seemed to breathe the luxury of bygone eras. In the center of the room stood a huge canopy bed draped in ivory silk. Of course, the heroine demanded to be treated with dignity, but even she did not expect such a turn of events. The maid warned her. The Duke even allowed her to move freely around the mansion as long as she was its resident. It seemed the maid didn't like the idea of some street beggar occupying such a room, and she told the girl not to think of doing anything impudent. But now for Simone, it was absolutely unimportant whether the maid was happy or not. Now it was her room, and tomorrow her new life as a noble lady began. The first thing she did was collapse fully clothed onto the huge, comfortable bed and announce that she was going to take a nap so that the maid would finally leave. Simone felt like the heroine of a love story, even despite the servant's displeased face. The lady promised to send Simone a personal maid tomorrow, who would serve her from now on. And wishing her a peaceful rest, the maid finally left, and Simone enjoyed her new life as an aristocrat in a huge mansion. The estate's garden was fragrant with flowers, and vases lined along the paths held bouquets of exotic flowers exuding an intoxicating aroma. Early in the morning, Simone's personal maid arrived, trembling all over as she introduced herself to her mistress. The heroine immediately noticed that the young girl was shaking incredibly hard and could not even raise her head. The maid's name was Anna, and Simone kindly offered to give her a tour of the mansion. Anna told us about an ancient place, a mansion whose history stretches back centuries, and some pages of this history are written in blood. But now life in the cursed mansion was much better than it had been before, and Anna could not complain about anything. There were a lot of people in the huge courtyard of the mansion, and each person was doing something. The atmosphere in the mansion was quite lively. The servants were talking to each other and laughing out loud. Anna admitted that everyone thinks that the people in the mansion live in despondency and sadness, but this is absolutely not true. The mansion did have strict rules, and ghosts sometimes appeared, but in difficult times they were able to unite and become very friendly. All the courtiers were on good terms with each other and considered themselves a real huge family. But of course, there were exceptions in this group, and yet there was one girl who was different from the rest. Simone thanked Anna, and only thanks to her was she able to better understand the atmosphere in the cursed mansion. It was slowly getting dark outside, and Anna began to worry that it would soon get dark, and it would probably be better to go back to the mansion. Anna brought dinner to the heroine's room, and it was the most incredible food that Simone had ever seen in her life. As she said, they prepared the same thing for her as for the master, and she was definitely going to like it. It was a completely different level compared to what she had eaten in the previous world until now, namely bread, sprouted potatoes, and red porridge. Seeing the incredible treat, Simone thanked her personal maid who had done a great job today. Today she wanted to dine alone and leisurely and was happy to let the maid go. Anna was supposed to clean up after Simone had dinner, but the heroine reminded her that it was almost time for everyone to go to bed, and the promise that everyone in the mansion would go to bed early was given by every resident of the cursed estate. Therefore, Simone reminded Anna once again that she should never forget that this rule could not be disobeyed. And bowing low, the maid asked for forgiveness and agreed that it was better not to argue with the mistress. She left the room in a hurry, wishing the girl a good night, and this was the first time she had been let out so early. That evening, Simone finally enjoyed a delicious feast that she would definitely remember for the rest of her life. Candles burned in the cursed mansion, casting ominous shadows on the walls while the necromancer dined alone. An ominous tree, whose roots had been intertwined underground for centuries, feeding on rot and darkness, awakened on a moonless night. Its gnarled branches, like crooked fingers, extended towards the mansion on the hill as if in anticipation. Simone calmly enjoyed the aristocrat's feast, savoring every bite of the incredible dishes. She slowly cut into the huge cutlet, from which aromatic juices flowed, and Simone was so touched that she was ready to burst into tears. Suddenly, a creak was heard behind the door. Simone froze, putting down her fork. She felt a chill run down her back, despite the warmth of the fireplace. There was definitely someone behind the door, and at that very moment, a hellish voice whispered for the lady to open the door immediately. The creaking sound came again, louder and closer. Simone's heart began to pound wildly, and images of the ghosts and shadows that inhabited this cursed mansion flashed through her head. Someone had obviously touched the handle on the other side of the door because it twitched slightly, and Simone noticed it. The voice urged her to open the door immediately because the Duke himself was standing behind it. The words, clothed in a velvety baritone, slid under the door like poisonous snakes. Simone walked slowly towards the door, remaining at a safe distance, and knew it had begun. She loudly asked what the Duke wanted from her at such a late hour, and all the inhabitants of the estate should already be asleep. But Simone could smell the putrid smell of earth emanating from these gentle words, and she could see the shadows outside the windows dancing unnaturally. Taking hold of the handle, Simone stated that unfortunately she could not open the door to her room so late. The frightening voice continued to insist that she let him inside as soon as possible. She knew the tree, ancient and evil as the mansion itself, wanted only one thing to absorb her life force, to be saturated with the energy concentrated within her. It decided to launch a direct assault, using deception and flattery to gain trust, but Simone was not one to easily fall for the tricks of the other world. Yes, even the most evil necromancer was terrified to be near such a vile ghost. But she certainly didn't want to become the prey of the ominous tree today without finishing her dinner. Clenching her fragile fists, the heroine bravely approached the door and prepared to fight back. Simone was not allowed to be afraid, although she understood perfectly well that behind the door was the most terrible ghost in her life. And it was definitely not the Duke, so the lady confidently said that she could not open the door now because she was too sleepy. She invited the Duke to come back in a week and promised to open the door only in that case. The ghost, still behind the door, saw the lady through a small crack, and he definitely wanted to know that she was telling the truth. The tree thirsted for a victim, its roots torn from the ground, but it floated silently in the night darkness, like horror. Simone peered through the crack in the door to make sure the ominous cursed tree was gone. The last echoes of the creaking whispers had died away, and now an ominous silence reigned in the corridor. Suddenly there was a knock, rather insistent, as if someone was waiting for an invitation. Simone froze, listening. The tree could have retreated, but it didn't go away. It just changed its strategy, sending her a new, unknown challenge. Finally, it was all over, and only a bloody trace from the hellish plant remained on the corridor floor. Now she knew for sure that something was waiting for her there, and that something really wanted to get inside. Early in the morning, Anna woke up her mistress, entering her room with the first rays of the sun. The first thing the maid asked was how the new guest had slept the previous night. As soon as the heroine opened her eyes, she remembered what happened at night, how the ominous tree tried to get inside. Simone decided to lie and confessed that she slept like a log, while Anna was glad that everything was okay with the lady. But she noticed that the handle was probably broken and asked what had happened last night. Having told the whole truth, Simone admitted that she had been walking towards the tree from the main gate, but as agreed, she promised to deal with it in a week. Anna was shocked because that ominous tree had blocked the entrance to the mansion for many centuries. The maid even had time to think that Simone was just a good person, but she turned out to be much better. And in the end, this innocent girl turned out to be a terrible necromancer who can control the dead and the very power of death. The Duke said that until he called, Simone was free to stay in the mansion and do whatever she wanted. For some reason, Anna trembled again at the sight of her mistress and promised to bring food to her room again. And while the lady was eating, Anna also promised to find out the bedtime for everyone in the mansion. Despite her fear, the maid really enjoyed serving her new mistress. She felt some kind of respect from her. It was her direct responsibility to take care of her mistress, and Simone even thanked the maid for her service. The sun barely broke through the thick, dusty curtains of the cursed mansion. The Duke sat in his office, immersed in gloomy silence, and on his desk stood a calendar with days crossed out. 3 days have passed, and they say that Simone still hasn't left her room today. No one has seen her either. The butler reported that, according to Anna, the girl does not miss a single meal. But otherwise, she never called the servants or left her room, even to get some fresh air. The butler warned he decided to inform the gentleman about this out of an abundance of caution, because some doubted whether this girl really had the power to lift the curse, and the butler was afraid that they would create unnecessary commotion by letting a stranger into the Duke's house. They could only believe her words, so they could only hope that Simone was telling the truth. Whether this is true or a blatant lie of the necromancer, the residents of the estate will be able to find out very soon. The Duke asked the butler to stop worrying, but he was overly agitated by everything that was happening. The gentleman warned that no matter what the result from Simone, he was ready to wait a little longer. Just in case, the butler decided to increase surveillance of the stranger, and time gradually passed in the mansion. Now the 6th day had arrived, and Simone finally left her room for the first time and went to the Duke. He noticed her transformation. The girl really looked pretty good. It was all only thanks to him. But the Duke noted that the girl's hair color had become completely different, and before, her black locks had immediately caught the eye. Simone decided to use magic paint, and she didn't really want to tell everyone that she was a powerful necromancer. She used the Archduke's leftover paint and asked if there was anything wrong with that. At last, she graced everyone with her presence, and the Duke asked if the girl had really not gone outside all this time, because he had to know what she had been doing in the room for a whole week while no one was watching. Simone warned the Duke not to worry and that the curse would be lifted on time, as she had warned earlier. The Duke, with long white hair, frowned, his eyes the color of the winter sky, filled with fatigue and slight irritation. He asked the butler to call one of the assistants right away to sort out some issues. A young man who looked like a warrior entered the office, his movements smooth and confident, as if honed in countless battles. Simone immediately noticed his gaze, direct and piercing like the blade of a sword, penetrating any skin. He resembled a wild animal that had accidentally wandered into the cage of high society. The young man bowed affably and greeted my lady, and as soon as he removed his hood, Simone realized that she knew this guy. There was a sense of strength and determination in this young man, untainted by court intrigues. His name was Ren. He was from the Adventurers Guild, and he definitely came here for a reason. The Adventurers Guild was famous throughout the Empire, and they often helped the Duke resolve many issues. The heroine recognized this fair-haired young man with sky-blue eyes as soon as she saw him. She looked at him intently, realizing that she could not help but recognize this painfully familiar face. He was one of the main characters in the story. I woke up and discovered that I was hiding my power. Ren was not just a guild assistant, but a companion of the main character named Abel, the well-known crown prince of Ruiwi, Dinvian. His name was whispered with respect even among his enemies, and his skill with a sword became legendary. According to the plot, he was supposed to meet Abel around this time, but for some reason the hero unexpectedly found himself at the Duke's estate. He said that today he was ordered to carry out the client's orders, and that was the reason he came here. Simone greeted the gentleman politely and admitted that she was incredibly glad to meet him. The Duke told the young man that the girl would tell him what needed to be done, and in the meantime he could wait calmly. The Duke asked the butler to show the young man his quarters for the immediate future. The butler asked him to follow him and warned him that the young man would have to stay at the ducal estate for a short time. The butler politely went to show the guest the room where he was to stay while completing the task. The Duke provided Simone with records of the bedtimes of the inhabitants and the mansion, collected by her servant. Taking the sheets of paper in her hands, the girl began to carefully read the information provided to her. The last to stay awake were the Archduke and the Kelle, and the rest of the like went to bed early, as agreed. The Duke asked in surprise if my lady would really be able to get rid of this tree before tomorrow. Simon's preparations were already complete, and she had performed many rituals throughout the week. And if that swordsman copes with his role, then tomorrow morning the tree near the estate will no longer be there. The Duke couldn't believe that the curse could be lifted so quickly and asked what would happen if she failed. Simone understood perfectly well that if the curse could not be lifted, then all the inhabitants of the estate would have the same outcome. She, the Duke, and that swordsman will all become fertilizer for the cursed, sinister plant that will consume their body and soul. The Duke imagined terrifying images of the gnarled roots of a tree strangling a young girl. This realization made him feel uneasy, because she had just admitted that everyone could die eventually. The Duke was surprised at how easily Milady spoke of her impending death, which could very well happen. But he just wanted the cursed tree to finally disappear from the estate forever. The pink sky above the cursed estate spread like blood flowing across the canvas of heaven. After speaking with the Duke, Simone calmly went to her room to prepare to lift the curse. In the living room, she saw the very young man who was to cut down the cursed tree. It seemed to him that Simone was late, so he decided to sit down first and asked if they had done something wrong with my lady. She replied jokingly that his behavior could not help but irritate him, and laughed after her words. The young man stood up and with a smile on his face declared that since the employer was uncomfortable, he would have to stand. If you look into it, his employer was the Duke, and at that moment the heroine finally remembered the true character of this man. Before discussing the plan, she decided to ask one thing and asked the young man to sit down in his place. Simone, her shock of hair rising above her delicate features, told Ren gravely that lifting the curse could be very dangerous, and he needed to understand that. He saw fear in her eyes, but also unwavering determination. He knew that Simone would not risk her life in vain, and if she warned of danger, it was real. The young man laughed and asked if the girl really thought he would come to the cursed mansion without any preparation. In real life, this man turned out to be even more unbearable than in the novel, but his skills were beyond doubt. Although the heroine was worried that they met at a different time than in the original, but now the main thing is that, as planned, they need to remove the curse and go their separate ways. Simone sat down opposite the young man and said that she would like to inform him of the upcoming event. Tonight, when the tree consumed her, he would need to do something very important to break the curse. The girl, her bright scarlet eyes flashing, confessed that it was at this very moment that he would need to cut down the cursed tree with all his might. On the one hand, her words sounded quite easy, but in reality, everything was much more terrible. The young man just noticed how the color of the lady's eyes changed from brown to blood red, and at that moment he was truly scared. He jumped up from his seat and asked if she really meant to say that she would deliberately allow herself to be swallowed by the tree. And after this, will he really have to cut down the cursed tree? And the young man understood everything correctly. But he couldn't believe that my lady was really going to sacrifice her life to lift the curse. But Simone understood that there was no talk of sacrifice. It was just as Simone had said, and she had heard that this young man was the best swordsman in the Adventurers Guild. She assumed that it would not be difficult for him to cut down such a tree, and indeed it was easy for him. But there was one tricky moment. Someone who doesn't own a sword might not know this, and there was one small nuance here. To cut down such a tree, one would have to deal a powerful blow, and the one who was swallowed would also be in great danger. Ren wondered if there was even the slightest chance that the customer himself might get hurt. And if this could happen, the young man warned that he was not ready to make such a sacrifice. For the heroine, this could have been a real failure, and she prayed that she would not reach a dead end at this point. According to the story, this young man was a kind crown prince who could not bear to see casualties among his people. And now Simone was possibly in danger of death not only from the tree, but also from the occult society, the Duke, and the company of main characters. What the prince was most indignant about was why the Duke allowed a fragile girl to deal with such a terrible curse. Although Simone assured him that this was unlikely to happen, the Duke still allowed the seemingly weak girl to remove the curse alone. Perhaps, as rumored, he was planning to use the human as a sacrifice for some dark ritual, and if that was indeed the case, Ren would be disappointed. The young man couldn't leave the client alone, so he offered to follow Lear, but warned that if there was any danger, he would immediately stop everything. Simone finally managed to convince him, and they decided to do just that, because the girl also valued her life. The young man was ready to believe her because she was calm and probably well prepared, and despite the fact that he was overcome with doubts, he trusted the stranger and was ready to help her. Ren warned that he would come for the lady when the sun set to finally cut down the damned tree. The silhouette of a black raven, ominous and clear, stood out against the crimson sunset, as if foreshadowing trouble. A black raven circled over the cursed estate as soon as it began to get dark, and it seemed as if it was looking out for something or waiting for something. As soon as darkness fell over the estate, the maid brought Mr. Wren to the heroine's room. She thanked Anna for her concern and asked her to go to bed as early as possible today. The young man closed the door behind him and understood that today a very important event awaited them, one that would affect all the inhabitants of the estate. Today was the very night the heroine spoke of, and everyone should be very careful. Ren asked what he needed to do because he was ready to follow the necromancer's instructions. Simone asked the young man to just wait here and calm down, and the cursed tree should appear soon. The young man could not believe how it could appear in the estate if it was growing outside the building. He couldn't even imagine how a tree could move at all, and Simone's words sounded like a stupid joke. She asked him to sit down, and she understood that he simply did not realize what was happening, warning him that he simply had to do his job. And from that moment on, it didn't matter at all what he said, and he had to remain quiet. Inside the estate, there was impenetrable darkness. Only the moonlight, penetrating through the cracks in the shutters, drew strange shadows on the floor. All this time, the young man waited obediently, tapping out the familiar rhythm of the song with the finger of his right hand. Simone looked at the night-starry sky, and Ren didn't understand how much longer he had to sit and just wait. He looked at Simone with interest and tried to understand why this girl decided to remove the terrible curse. She looked to be only 17 years old, and he was sure she was definitely his age. A soft knock was heard in the corridor of the cursed estate, which meant that the cursed tree had entered under the cover of night. The heroes heard this quiet knock and looked towards the door, because that's where it was coming from. Simone asked not to say anything, realizing that the ominous tree had penetrated inside. She warned the young man to remain silent, but he could not understand how the tree had reached this room. Everything that was happening sounded like complete nonsense, and Ren couldn't believe that it was actually true. It was an unusual knock. There was a sense of evil will in it, something alien and hostile. Its roots, like giant snakes, broke through the stone foundation and penetrated the corridors. Having collected her thoughts, the necromancer clearly felt that the shape of the tree had changed greatly for some reason. The ominous knocking grew louder as it approached the door, and at that moment, real panic gripped Rena. He shielded the girl with his body and asked Lady Simone not to leave his side. The lady pushed the young man away and told him the whole plan, declaring that she did not need protection at all. The young man was incredibly scared, so he grabbed the girl's hand, afraid that something might happen to her. Simone was calm and reserved, but it didn't look like the young man was joking. While he was holding her hand, Simone looked at the swordsman and decided to explain to him once again what was happening. Whatever is knocking on the door now will soon devour it and then head towards the red tree at the main gate. And when it catches her, the young man must go down to the terrace and wait there to finally destroy the ominous tree. The sinister creature with twisted arms must turn back into a tree, and the swordsman must cut it down along with it. The entity in the shape of a huge root crawled closer and grabbed the door handle, the rough bark covered in sharp thorns crunching against the metal. A whisper, as if from hell itself, asked if the girl was really in the room, and she understood that the entity had revealed the necromancer, and the show would begin right now. The necromancer, without fear, began to speak boldly with the entity that was on the other side of the door. The cursed creature claimed to be an archduke, and the girl promised to open the door for him that very day. The sinister scarlet entity revealed a huge eye, the size of a dining table, pulsating with a poisonous light. The cursed spirit seemed to sense the presence of its owner, stopped for a moment near the door, and its wooden flesh trembled. She warned Simone that she would soon open the door, but Ren's looked more and more gloomy with each passing second. The room filled with a terrifying scream. The scarlet eye blinked, and it was not just a part of the entity, it was its evil heart, pulsing with darkness and hatred. Simone opened the door to let in the ominous darkness and stood right in front of the vile creature, looking into its eyes. The girl's eyes began to glow with a bright crimson light, and she was ready to deal with the vile monster. She stood right in front of him, and the young man could not understand why the girl did not even dodge. An ominous entity entwined the girl's body with huge roots, lifting her up to the very ceiling. Wrapping herself tighter around her body, Simone found herself in the clutches of a terrible monster, smelling a terrible smell. Ren stood next to the sword and did not understand what to do, but the heroine warned him that she could be patient. While in the clutches of the terrible creature, she smiled and screamed that as soon as she was eaten, this monster would return to the tree at the main gate, and then the young man would need to cut it down. The monster's scarlet eyes were like hot coals burning in the pitch darkness, but Simone was not afraid at all. And the most afraid of all was Ren, who had seen something like this for the first time in his life, and now he was shrouded in fear. Only now did the young man realize that the rumors about the ducal family had been true all this time, and that this place was truly cursed. The smell of rot filled the entire room, and the young man realized that he had only one way out to get out of the room. Ren saw a large window and understood that he definitely wouldn't be able to go outside through the door. He ran before the monster swallowed him, and breaking the window, jumped from the second floor. The cursed entity engulfed the necromancer, a sinister mass of intertwined roots and rotting leaves closing around the girl, depriving her of air. Inside the monstrous womb, where age-old trees rotted and restless souls groaned, the girl was not broken at all. Somewhere within this ball of darkness, among the broken branches and twisted bones, a pale hand was visible. But that hand definitely didn't belong to Simone. The bony hand touched the floor, hissing, "It must return." The monster needed to return to its body of the cursed tree as quickly as possible, and it slowly crawled, leaving bloody traces behind it. The necromancer's magic, shrouded in a curse, was just waiting for its moment to put an end to this chaos once and for all. All this time, the frightened young man ran as quickly as possible towards the tree in order to get there in time. Ren was so scared that he couldn't even imagine that something like this could actually happen. He just wondered what kind of horror he had just seen, as if he had found himself in the very abyss of hell. The ducal family was indeed a cursed place, but the young man had never encountered anything like it before. But most of all, he couldn't believe that the bloodthirsty monster had grabbed the girl, and she hadn't even flinched. And he had only one question left: who was she anyway? That she could easily end up in the clutches of the damned monster. Ren hid behind a tree and saw a cursed entity with crooked fingers trying to get to the tree. The monster really did move across the ground, looking like a huge, dark, scarlet mass of darkness. As Simone said, the sinister entity is slowly trying to return to the main body. His outlines were blurred, as if woven from the darkness itself, but his scarlet eyes shone with a devilish clarity. Cracking and writhing like a snake, it crawled back into the tree's bark, and the tree's branches, like bony fingers, reached out to the entity, welcoming its return. The air smelled of rot and old earth, and a vortex of dark energy swirled around the tree. From a distance, the young man did not notice, but the terrifying stench around this tree was simply unbearable. The cursed entity returned to its body, and the young man continued to watch and understood that at that moment, Simone was inside. He tried not to breathe in the foul smell and believed that this girl definitely shouldn't die. Ren watched intently as the entity merged with the cursed tree, emitting a terrible hiss. Inside the tree, the entity merged with its body, feeling its strength being restored. Upon seeing the cursed energy, the young man felt an ominous, suffocating aura spreading around him. But he needed to be fully prepared because right now he had to take out his sword and cut down the tree. Ren was absolutely not allowed to panic, and with a trembling hand he grabbed the handle of the ball. He mentally heard the words of Simone, who had earlier told him in detail how he should act when the cursed tree swallowed her. Ren needed to cut down a tree right now, and this was the first time he had encountered such a task. Taking the sword in his hands, the young man even grinned, feeling as if he was in the very depths of hell. Simone was currently inside the tree that had swallowed her up, and all the young man had to do was strike as hard as he could. At first, it seemed like a fairly simple task, but now the young man was convinced that it was a real horror. Pulling himself together and gathering his strength, he swung his sword and dealt the fatal blow. Ren deftly struck the huge, ominous tree trunk with his sword and felt something strange. This wood was cut much easier than paper, and this certainly could not be true. Peering deeper into the cursed tree, the young man began to become more and more afraid with each passing second. Inside, he saw a seething scarlet liquid. It pulsated like a living heart, emitting a stench of rot and sulfur. Suddenly, the tree shook. The bark cracked and gnarled. Black branches began to burst from the wound inflicted by the sword. Now the hero finally understood that this was not a cursed energy at all, but something more terrible. There was dead mana inside the tree, and darkness gradually began to thicken around it. The young man moved to a safe distance and waited attentively for Simone to finally appear. The terrible stench made it almost impossible for him to breathe. It was becoming too dangerous. He knew he had to get her out of there before it was too late. The seething mana inside bubbled. The scarlet liquid began to seethe with renewed vigor, as if responding to the movement of the branches. He realized that he was facing not just a cursed tree, but something much more ancient and sinister. A powerful light appeared in the center of the cursed tree, becoming brighter and more dazzling until it filled the entire space around it. Sparks burst from the sphere, scattering around and settling on branches, leaves, and the ground like dark dust. The tree exploded at some point, and a stunned Ren couldn't understand what had just happened. Instead of the cursed tree, there was a huge purple ball floating in the air, and Ren was just waiting for Simone to get out of there alive. A silhouette formed inside the sphere, at first blurry and indistinct, but it gradually took on the outlines of a human figure. Finally, the necromancer herself appeared in the center of the sphere, as if she were the personification of light and hope, appearing in the very heart of the curse. The scarlet eyes, once a symbol of submission to the darkness, now glowed with righteous anger, reflecting the determination to end the curse. The necromancer stepped forward without fear, her movements confident and precise, like those of a master of her craft. Her clothes and hair were covered in the red cursed liquid, and with a smile the girl declared that the young man had done an excellent job of his task. What Ren experienced during this time of food could not be described in words, and he only looked at the lady in surprise. The necromancer stood in the center, and around her on the ground there were scarlet spots of cursed energy, and Ren just wanted to know if she had just blown up the monster. Simone smiled. In any case, the young man saved her, and she admitted that she almost vomited from the unbearable stench. Finally, it was all over, and after laying down his sword, Rendo still couldn't come to his senses. He only noticed that the girl's hair color had changed again, because before this her hair was light brown. The necromancer appeared before the young man in her true form, and grumbled that all sorts of vile filth had stuck to her. The young man could not take his eyes off her, and a completely different girl appeared in front of him, with pale skin and bright scarlet eyes. She was absolutely calm. She had just managed to do something incredible, but it turned out she didn't care. The putrid smell was unbearable, and the lady reported that Ren had done a very good job and could now rest. She left the place where the cursed tree had once stood, and only wanted to finally wash away the terrible smell. Without saying another word, Simone hurried back to her room, promising to see the young man tomorrow. The lady was a necromancer. Her black hair, blood-red eyes, and huge amount of dead mana gave her away. The necromancers were executed and wiped off the face of the earth about 300 years ago, but one still survived. And this was the heroine, Simone, whom for many years they tried in every possible way to kill or execute. At that moment, the young man realized that if she really did have the power of a necromancer, perhaps that would be enough to lift his father's curse. Ren arrived at this mansion hoping to find a clue to the curse, but never thought he would come across such a creature. Luck was definitely on his side, and once the young man realized this, he decided to get to know this girl better. The next morning, all the inhabitants of the ducal mansion could not believe their eyes, and how such a thing could have happened overnight. The place where the cursed tree once stood was now empty, and not a trace of it remained. No one could understand what had happened last night, and whether the fragile girl had really completed her task. The cursed tree was indeed no longer there, and everyone understood that the necromancer had kept her promise. That same morning, the Duke went first to check whether the terrible curse had been lifted. And I saw with my own eyes that this child really kept her word, and the entrance to the estate was always beautiful. The gentleman asked the butler to open the main gate, and for the first time in his life, he felt such relief. The gates of the estate, which had been sealed with terrible magic, were finally opened, and the heroes had to see the guests off. After a terrible night, the necromancer slept for a long time and regained her strength, and finally in the morning she opened her eyes. Having asked the maid what time it was, the girl realized that she had probably slept for half a day. But as soon as she woke up, she realized that there was someone else in the room besides Anna. Indeed, the maids were bustling about in her room, offering the girl breakfast or bringing her hot tea. Something strange was happening here today, and the heroine couldn't understand why the girls were behaving this way. Around her bed were 4 maids who intended to serve their mistress with the utmost sincerity, as always. Simone didn't understand what these strangers were talking about, since she had never met any of them before, and decided to go straight to the Duke. She burst into his office screaming, her room overflowing with visitors, but she arrived just in time. The Duke immediately reported that he had once decided to trust an unknown lady, and she had fully met his expectations. Therefore, from that day on, he decided that she would be treated as an honored guest of the estate, and he would make sure that the girl did not need anything. Simone even thought that she would not be able to get used to this place, but the Duke kindly asked her to sit down next to him. From now on, she had to do everything possible to lift the curse from this estate, because in the end, that was their agreement. But Simone was a little taken aback by the fact that today everyone had suddenly started behaving differently. The butler even offered the girl aromatic chamomile tea to calm the mind and body. The lady thought perhaps Ren should have already come to the Duke and told him about what happened yesterday. The Duke asked Simone to tell him in detail what had happened the previous night and how she had managed to deal with the cursed tree. Lord Ren struck hard. Simone blew up the tree with dead mana, but that wasn't quite what the Duke wanted to hear. He wanted to know the nature of the terrible curse and why they had been unable to dispel it for so many years. The monster turned out to be terribly timid, and although it was incredibly weak, it was also annoyingly smart, and after all, it was still a living creature. Therefore, when it wandered around the estate in search of food, it was afraid that the inhabitants would quickly realize its weakness, and therefore it moved only at night. The Duke asked if the creature discovered someone was awake late at night, it would attack and devour the person on the spot. The creature turned out to be weak in the necromancer's opinion, but the Duke did not understand why they could not get rid of it. Because it was scared, it used all its strength solely to protect itself, and this made it incredibly resilient. However, Simone said that sometimes this protective creature directs its power elsewhere. The moment it absorbs food, it develops a vulnerable spot, and that is where Simone ended up. So she asked Lord Ren to cut down the tree at that very moment when the creature was most vulnerable. Only now did the Duke learn that the necromancer had allowed herself to be consumed in order to disarm the creature in an instant. And he could never have imagined that the girl would be ready to put her life in danger. The Duke listened attentively to her words and asked how she managed to discover the true nature of the tree. After all, even the ducal family for many years could not understand and knew absolutely nothing about the terrible curse. In fact, the heroine managed to find out about this from the novel, but she definitely couldn't say that she read about it in a comic book. She said that there is a tradition passed down from generation to generation by necromancers, so they know everything. Necromancers were thought to have died out about 300 years ago, but one of them was still alive. The Duke decided to ask about it later, and Simone was glad he turned a blind eye to this information. After the conversation, the girl left the Duke's office, telling him the whole truth about what happened the previous night. But the master didn't even ask about her plans, which means he decided to entrust the removal of the curse entirely to her. At that moment, walking down the corridor, she saw the maid Anna running and for some reason shouting her name. For some reason, Anna was incredibly excited and asked if the gentleman had said something and allowed Lady Simone to stay at the estate. The Duke didn't even mention it, and Simone passed the test his lordship had ordered without incident. She smiled and admitted to Anna that they should probably start revising the management. At that very second, the necromancer felt a strange energy in the corridor and heard leisurely steps. She turned around and saw a girl in dark clothes, gloomy, with her head down. The footsteps echoed throughout the corridor, and there seemed to be a dark energy hovering around this lady. And Simone could not confuse the smell of blood and corpses with anything, but she saw this girl here for the first time. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, and Simone closed her eyes against the unbearable smell. Anna whispered to the lady to immediately lower her head because the Archduchess herself appeared before them. Simone was ready to choke, but she saw the lady at home for the first time, and this name was definitely listed in the manual. There was one rule in the manual: one was never to enter Archduchess Flora's chambers. No one was ever allowed to knock on her door or even pass by her so that she could hear their footsteps. Servants were also required to prepare 2 portions for each meal for the lady every day, and this rule was strictly observed. The lady walked slowly into her chambers, and Simone clearly realized that something was wrong here. The ducal estate had been haunted by terrible events for many years, and something happened just 1 year ago. A new maid had just arrived at Illiston Manor to work there, and her name was Leah. The head butler warned her that when she passed the Duke's office, she must always be quiet and slow her pace. Leah had heard terrible rumors that this place was cursed and completely unsuitable for habitation. When she arrived on her first day at work, the atmosphere here was much better than she expected. Leah understood perfectly well that as long as she locked the door at night and followed the rules of the management, everything would definitely be fine with her. The butler explained the rules of the mansion to her, and at one point asked her to stop near one of the doors. He pointed to a room that was visible from the stairs, and it was the chambers of the Chief Archduchess. The butler asked Leah again if she had read the manual and understood all the rules correctly. The most important rule here was to never enter the chambers of the main lady of the mansion. After all, this was the Archduchess's room, and Leah wondered if it looked too dirty as there was a cobweb hanging above the door. The butler warned the maid and pointed out the area she was supposed to clean, and it ended at this staircase. Leah was forbidden to show any interest in the Archduchess's chambers and was also not allowed to pass by that door. Therefore, the maid was obliged to do only the work assigned to her and not ask unnecessary questions. After this, Leah slowly adapted to life on the estate. She followed the rules without question and even made friends with the other servants. She happily interacted with the other maids, and one afternoon she went to clean the central staircase. However, every day Leah experienced strange sensations, although outwardly everything was normal. The maid had one thought that she could not get rid of, no matter what she did. Every day, looking at the dirty door that she saw from afar, she couldn't believe that someone really lived there. One day, Leah couldn't contain her curiosity and approached the mysterious door. Despite the strict rules, she carefully touched the handle, but she understood that she was not allowed to do this. She couldn't be too curious, and at that point Leah decided to just get back to cleaning. Suddenly, she heard a strange whisper coming from just behind the mysterious door. Leah was scared because she had just heard a voice on the other side of the door, and there was definitely someone there. The voice grew louder and louder, saying only one phrase: "Don't forget, don't forget, don't forget." Suddenly, the door opened slightly, and the maid saw real horror as splashes of blood flew out of the room. It was definitely blood, which was spreading in a dark, small stain across the entire floor right before her eyes. Leah couldn't understand whose blood it was, and why everyone was strictly forbidden to enter the lady's chambers. The maid was most afraid that her ladyship was injured, and she shouted loudly to ask if she was all right. The door opened slightly, and through the small crack appeared the pale, thin face of the Archduchess. She looked like a corpse. The eyes were sunken, the skin was stretched tight over the bones, and the lips were cracked like dried earth in a drought. Leah was beside herself with fear, and right in front of her stood what looked like a living dead person, but it was definitely the Archduchess. The maid only offered her help, afraid that perhaps the lady was ill and she had to help her. But as soon as she looked inside the room, she saw real horror. The whole room was covered in blood, and a man was tied to a log in the middle of the room. She saw something she should never have seen, and it was her biggest mistake. The lady held a sword in her hands and angrily asked why the maid couldn't remember something. Her words sounded like pure nonsense, and at that moment the lady chased the innocent girl with all her might. She was shouting something in an incomprehensible language, holding a bloody dagger in her hands, and seemed ready to kill the girl right then. Perhaps the problem was her fear and impatience, and Leah became more afraid than she had ever been in her life. Just as she rushed down the stairs pale with fear, Leah suddenly stumbled. The girl's foot suddenly slipped, and her body, frightened and innocent, rolled down the stairs. The sound of her body hitting the steps echoed across the cold marble of the castle, but she already lay motionless below, like a broken doll. A pool of blood appeared on the floor, quickly spreading into a scarlet stain, contrasting with the whiteness of the stone. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of the Archduchess, watching the tragic spectacle from above. The Archduchess descended, maintaining an icy calm that contrasted with the panic that reigned around her. The lady only whispered that the maid was to blame for everything, and that she was the one who was wrong in the tragic situation. Simone spent the entire day studying the manual to understand why a terrible curse had been placed on the estate. She slammed the book shut, and the maid Anna asked if there was something wrong with the mistress. The curse written on the last page of the manual, the very last one to appear, was the main reason why the Archduke kidnapped Simone in the original story. At first glance, it appears that the curse was placed on Lady Flora, but in reality, the curse was placed on their forgotten son, Jace. It was this same curse that Simone from the original story ultimately failed to understand. This certainly made sense, as solving such a problem required powerful healing powers. Simone's power as a necromancer has only destructive properties, and right now there are no holy virgins or righteous people in the Empire. Simone tried to figure out where she could find these people because she had no other choice. She rose abruptly from her seat and went straight to the Duke to discuss the main issue with him. Anna began to worry when she saw the lady's worried face and asked if she could help with anything. Simone just asked for a magic hair dye, no matter what color, one that would last a long time. Anna suggested buying it together and choosing for the lady exactly the color she would like. She was surprised by everything when she heard the maid's words, not understanding why she decided to suggest this particular thing. The lady became thoughtful, by the way. She had been shopping for a very long time and was happy to unwind. Overjoyed, Anna went to get ready, and Simone suggested meeting a little later after talking with the Duke. She felt kindness emanating from this girl, and for some reason Anna was a ray of light in this estate. Joyful as a child, she ran down the corridor and only wanted to be useful to the mistress. The presence of this girl next to her gave Simone strength, and for some reason she felt great respect for her. Entering the Duke's office, Simone immediately declared that they needed to find the precious stone. The butler noted that the lady looked wonderful today, and all this was only thanks to life in the duchy. The Duke asked if the necromancer had decided which curse she would remove next. Judging by how much she had transformed, she had adapted well to life here, which is why she asked the Duke to find the precious stone. To be precise, Simon needed to find a magic stone that would help remove a terrible curse. The magic stone was called the Holy Passion. It was the item she needed. Hearing the name, the Duke understood what kind of magic stone was being talked about, and he already knew about it. He only wondered if the Holy Passion Stone really existed, since before it was just a legend. This magic stone was mentioned in the novel called I Hid My Power When I Opened My Eyes. Legend has it that 300 years ago, a red gemstone sent anonymously led a saint who served the Almighty faithfully, and that is how it got its name. It was said that this was the only precious stone endowed with holy power. There were no saints in the new empire. In the original story, holy power was never used on Jace, but if Simone combines the power contained in the stone and her own, she might be able to heal the man. The problem was that even in the original story, it was never specifically stated where the magic stone was hidden. It was said that it was held in the hands of an old woman from a seaside village, but the Duke was sure that this was just a legend. And even if this stone exists, no one knows exactly where to find it, and it will be too difficult. Simone said that the god of death once told her information that the passion of the saint lies deep in the sea. It was this clue that pointed to the location of the magic stone, and even the Duke could not believe it. He opened his eyes in surprise when he heard about the god of death, and realized that this girl was definitely not an ordinary girl. In fact, the heroine simply quoted a line from the comic to make her words sound convincing. In any case, she has a rough idea of its location, and the butler wanted to know what kind of curse the magic stone required. Simone said that the latest curse from the manual is the most dangerous, requiring enormous strength. The Archduchess and the eldest son of the Illiston family will be eternally cursed unless the curse on Jace Carl is lifted. Simone told him all the information she knew, but the Duke still didn't understand something. The lady had come here to lift a centuries-old curse, and she certainly wasn't about to relax. So she warned the Duke that, at least as far as the curse was concerned, he should not hide anything from her anymore. Listening to her story, the butler at one point could not stand it and declared that he could no longer remain silent. His lord had no children yet, and he could not now turn a blind eye to her further insolence. The Duke asked the butler to calm down, because this girl was their ally, and regardless of her status, she had to be treated accordingly. That's why he even asked his closest confidant to step outside for a minute to discuss something with the necromancer. The butler never expected to be asked to leave the door, because they were talking about people no one knew about. The Duke sighed heavily and asked how the necromancer managed to find out about Jace, since this information was closed to everyone. Simone told she knows a lot, and Jace was cursed and also forgotten by this world for a long time. She came here to finally deal with all the curses of the ducal family. And does the Duke really think that she would recklessly get involved in this matter, knowing nothing and relying only on rumors? I never expected that a fragile girl would be able to lift the curse from both of them, because initially they were talking about the same tree. Now Simone was not completely confident in her abilities, but she promised and declared that she had to try. But this will only be possible in one case, only if she gets the magical stone of holy passion. Rumor has it that the magic stone is dangerous, so she couldn't just send someone to get it. The Duke promised to send a request to the Travelers Guild to find out about the magic stone as soon as possible. And as soon as Simone was about to leave his office, he asked with concern whether, if the curse were lifted, the child would be able to survive. Simone couldn't promise anything by promising to look at the condition, because she didn't even know where his son was. Smiling, she asked to be called when the travelers arrived, but for now, she was going to prepare herself with strength. The wind, coming through the broken windows, whispered stories of forgotten sins, of indelible curses that hung over this place. A request was sent to the Travelers Guild, and the Duke needed at least 5 experienced travelers. He asked the butler to do without the mages this time, and according to legend, the more mana someone uses, the easier it is to lure them. The butler put his hand to his chest and asked the Lord to ask the question that interested him. Is there something he still doesn't know, having served the Duke all his life? The Duke looked thoughtfully out the window and admitted that he could not say anything, realizing that the butler would not understand him. He only promised that when everything was over, the man would definitely find out about it, and asked not to ask any more questions. For many years, the butler had been researching information, and he knew a lot about the terrible curse. Today, he received a report from an informant and provided it to the master so that he could find out about the necromancer's past. He had to give some money to an employee of the orphanage where the child was staying in order to find out all the secrets. The butler suggested that necromancers exhibited signs from birth, so the parents were unable to cope with such a child and simply abandoned him. Considering the girl's age and her damn black hair, everyone understood that no one would adopt such a girl. Rumor has it that before she ran away, she tried to take her own life, and they say she just didn't want to end up in a cult. To be honest, many would have chosen death in her place, but she withstood all the tests. After reading the information, the Duke realized that Simone came here to survive, and she definitely did not come here to steal money. Judging by the address on the informant's documents, the orphanage was located on the Duke's territory and was within his possessions. The young man realized that such a place should definitely not exist anymore and ordered the butler to destroy it. The man merely obediently followed the Lord's orders and realized that it was now necessary to put an end to this matter. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, but no one expected uninvited guests today. The office door quietly opened, and in an instant the room was filled with an ominous aura. Because behind the door stood the Archduchess herself, who suddenly decided to show herself. Even the Duke himself did not expect to see her here, her gloomy and soulless eyes and pale skin. But she was still his relative, and smiling, the young man invited the girl into his office. After that terrible night, as soon as Ren saw Simone, a radiant smile appeared on his face. He noted that the girl looked incredibly good, while the heroine did not understand why he had become so cute. She thought that after the incident with the Scarlet Tree, she should meet Abel like in the original, but the Duke gave him a new task, in which he volunteered to participate, and he arrived at the mansion to listen to her. The young man was most amazed when he saw my lady, because today she had long blonde hair. Last time they were definitely chestnut, and the young man asked why there had been such a change. He saw her true appearance and was simply captivated by her charm, although Simone did not pay any attention to him. And even when asked what happened, she dryly replied that everything was fine, and that I hoped that the changes in the plot would be minor. Since the young man had met her before Abel, he now clearly considered her his ally. and he followed the girl around like a little clueless duckling, always repeating her name. However, in the original, the young man also joined Abel's group and helped him in many matters. He joined only out of interest in the necromancer's abilities, and the heroine knew it for sure. The two of them arrived at the Duke's office to discuss a new important task to lift the curse. The Duke did not think that Simone would also come, but in any case he would have called her, so when she met the gentleman, she decided to go with him. Simone already felt at home in the mansion, so she immediately settled comfortably in front of the master's table. He asked if he would mind if she told him everything in detail about the upcoming task. This time the task was completely different, and the young man had to find a mysterious jewel. Since Ren had often done this kind of thing, he felt that this task was too easy for him, but it was a little different from his usual activities. Simone told him that he needed to find an unusual stone called the Holy Passion. Even Ren was sure that this stone was only mentioned in legends, but Simone told him that there was a village on a cliff near the sea. They say that the magic stone was thrown into the sea from there, and now it should lie in its depths. Simone only knew that abandoned old people lived in this village and there were no children at all. She warned that when the young man met people there, he should ask if they had seen a red stone in the sea. The young man listened carefully to the information, and now this matter did not seem so simple to him. The lady warned that if the locals suggested searching the entire sea and he wasn't there, they would have to find another way. There were only legends about this stone, and no one could believe that it really existed. The Duke asked hesitantly if the young man could find a magic stone about which nothing was known. First, he needed to understand where that village was located so he knew where to look. The information was clearly insufficient, and after thinking about it, the young man said that he needed to find out as many details as possible. And since they've taken on this task, at the very least, the heroes will have to search the bottom of the entire sea. After talking with the Duke, the young man realized that the necromancer seemed to know a lot about magic stones. He asked Simone to tell him if there was a danger of being enchanted by a powerful magical stone. The lady admitted that he had absolutely nothing to worry about now, and that no problems should arise. In terms of mana, the boy was too weak to fall under his spell, and that was the main reason. For some reason, after the conversation, Ren looked incredibly thoughtful, and now he decided to ask something. He needed to get an answer to one important question. He asked the girl to answer directly. His proposal was unexpected, and the young man asked if she was ready to go on a mysterious adventure with him. Simone was sure he would go alone, so she didn't understand what this fool was saying now. He was given a task, but for some reason he wanted to go with her, which was strange in itself. The young man had a rough idea where the village was, but he was sure the girl knew a lot about the magic stone. Therefore, he assumed that she would be able to sense the energy of the stone before him, but the lady categorically refused. She hired him to make her life easier and didn't understand why she had to go with him. The young man smiled and admitted that in fact he just wanted to go with her, and there was no reason for it. She didn't even listen to his words and declared that she was not going to go on such an adventure. Simone warned her. She explained everything and asked her to get down to her work, since she had a meeting outside the house. But Ren didn't want to let her go and even offered to go with her to meet her. For some reason, the young man was incredibly intrusive today, and this really irritated the heroine. He still stood behind her while the lady tried to find out if he was her servant. As soon as she thought about this, an interesting thought came to her, and she asked if the young man would like to be near her. A charmed Ren admitted that he really would like to know more about the lady, and of course he was ready to be there. She had heard about his powers and said that she would allow him to stay by her side on one condition. Simone smiled and offered him to become her first employee who would perform certain tasks. The young man didn't even immediately believe that the girl had made such an unexpected proposal. She stood in front of him, calling him an employee, until he fully understood what he would have to deal with. He had outstanding swordsmanship skills, and thanks to the Adventurers Guild, he was also very good at gathering information. Simone needed an experienced man whom she could trust, and the young man expressed a desire to stay close to her. Therefore, the heroine was sure that this was an excellent move, and now she would have a reliable assistant. As Crown Prince, the young man probably did not expect such a proposal, and Simone found it amusing to watch his reaction, and the lady suggested that he think about it until their next meeting. The Duke gave the girl enough pocket money, and humming a cheerful song, she decided to go somewhere with Anna. She stepped onto the main staircase of the estate, and an unexpected thought occurred to her. Come to think of it, the heroine hadn't seen her personal maid, who had always been there before, all day today. Simone even suggested that perhaps the girl had left on some important business of her own. But she certainly couldn't forget about their plans, so the lady shouted her name throughout the estate. There was a specific rule in the manual that said you should never try to find missing servants. The next morning, Simone woke up feeling exhausted and her mind was racing with thoughts. There was another maid in her room who asked how her mistress had slept. Simone immediately asked if Anna was back, and she hadn't seen her since yesterday. But for some reason the maid ignored this question, asking what time she should serve breakfast. The heroine immediately felt a strange feeling, as if the maids were not telling her something while performing their duties. And the girl still didn't answer her question, pretending that the lady hadn't said anything. Simone decided to skip breakfast today, saying she needed to step away for a while. But she definitely understood that something was going on here, and it was no accident that the maids weren't answering this question. If you think about it, she is in a cursed mansion, and for some reason she took the disappearance of a person too lightly. Simone wasn't going to let this go, so she left her room and went in search of Anna. Anna never left her side or disappeared, so Simone was sure that something was wrong. Suddenly, the maid approached her, thinking that the mistress was looking for something, so she decided to talk to her. Simone asked if she had seen Anna, who had not appeared since yesterday and had disappeared without a trace. Perhaps she had been sent somewhere, but Simone was sure she should have been warned about this. The maid thought for a moment and admitted that the girl was supposed to be at breakfast today, but she definitely hadn't seen her. Anna suddenly disappeared, and the maid began to worry that something had happened again. The maid thought Anna was in her mistress's room, but she said that she had been trying to find her all this time. Simone asked me to tell her that she had been looking for her for a long time, but at that moment she noticed something. All the maids crowded around her and looked at Simone as if they saw a living dead person. For some reason they were incredibly scared and silently looked towards the necromancer. Pretending that nothing was happening, the girls began to discuss work matters and were getting ready to sort out yesterday's groceries. Simone felt that something was wrong here, but she couldn't understand what had happened. Suddenly, a formidable lady's voice was heard in the corridor, addressing a maid named Risa. The lady asked why she was lounging around here when she had to perform her main duties. It seemed as if they were seeing each other for the first time, and this formidable lady turned out to be the most important maid. She grabbed his hand and asked him to take it away, assuring him that she was just looking for this child. The stern lady warned that Madame Simone should return to her room. This is a place for servants, and there is nothing for her to see here. Simone was once again convinced that everyone in the mansion was behaving very strangely today and declared that she was only trying to find her personal maid. The lady warned that if they saw her, they would definitely tell her, but Simone understood that they definitely wouldn't do that. She studied the manual every day and tried to find at least some answers to her questions in the book. The servants' reactions made it clear that they were definitely hiding something from her, and Simone decided to start by looking for answers in the book. She read rule number 80, which said never to try to find missing servants. No matter how hard the heroine tried to remember, she definitely did not see this curse in the plot of the novel. The maids asked Madame Simone what curse she wanted to lift this time. The girl was surprised when she asked about Anna. They ignored her, and now they ask stupid questions. The girl confidently replied that she was going to remove the curse concerning the missing servants. Hearing this, the maids began to worry, admitting that it was too dangerous, but she could not leave Anna in danger. The heroine just wanted the kind girl to return to her again, because it was not without reason that she had disappeared without a trace. One of the maids stood silently with frightened eyes, while the other wanted to say something. The girls looked at each other strangely, as if they were really hiding something. Suddenly, one of the maids said, "This curse has another rule that no one knows about." This rule was not written in the manual, and Simone wondered if there was something else she didn't know about. The excited maid promised to tell her about the mysterious rule, but in return asked to find Anna. To begin with, Simone asked the girls to tell her the whole truth, even the smallest details. None of the maids had ever told anyone about this before, so the girls were really worried. One of them said that when the sun sets and the moon rises, something strange might happen in this estate. Simone might hear the missing maid's voice while walking down the hallway, but she must not answer and must go up to the next floor. The maid warned that the servant would return at some point, but that she could not look into her eyes, much less talk to her. Everyone understood perfectly well that we were talking about the maid Leah, who one day fell down the stairs. The lady warned that until she disappeared again, one must never talk to her under any circumstances. Simone couldn't believe that the missing maids were actually returning to the estate. The necromancer didn't understand why this wasn't written in the manual, as it was very important information. This rule was not in the book because the nobles were not supposed to know what was going on among the servants. The maid understood that her request was completely tactless, but she knew that only a necromancer could help her. She tearfully asked for the other maids to be saved, and Simone understood perfectly well what was being said. The missing maids returned to the mansion every night as ghosts, their damned souls unable to find solace. Having learned this new information, Simone couldn't even imagine that the servants had such rules, and now she had to find the missing girls in the cursed castle. When Simone learned some details from the maid, it became clear to her why the inhabitants of the mansion had been acting strangely all day. The head maid was worried that her subordinate Risa might suddenly break a strict rule, and until the curse on Floria and Jace is lifted, the heroine will not be able to rest at all, and she realized that Anna is not more important than any kind of rest. Simone came out of her room. The young man standing near her door asked where she was going. The heroine proudly answered she was going to remove the curse again. Every corridor, every room of the mansion breathed the history of the curse that hung over it like an invisible shadow. Simone walked down the hallway, remembering the maid's words that when the sun sets and the moon rises, something strange begins to happen in the mansion. While walking down the corridor, Simone can hear the voice of the missing maid, but she must not answer and is obliged to go up to another floor. The candles burned in the dim light, and Simone thought she should have taken a lantern with her first. Stopping for a second, the heroine felt something strange, and something was clearly happening on the first floor, because she clearly heard a strange clicking sound, constant, coming exactly from the first floor. The necromancer saw the maid with whom she had spoken just that morning, hurrying excitedly down the stairs. A dark shadow with glowing eyes called to the maid from around the corner of the mansion, influencing her mind and clouding it. The whisper ran through the corridors, penetrating straight into the consciousness of the young maid Risa, and she stood frozen in the middle of the polished parquet floor. Risa took a tentative step towards the shadows, the cold piercing her body, causing her skin to break out in goosebumps. It was good that Simone was nearby at that moment. She suddenly grabbed the maid's hand, realizing that a curse was taking over her mind right now. Risa didn't react to her words, and seemed to be going somewhere in the middle of the night, when all the servants should have already been asleep. Simone screamed for the girl to come to her senses, but the maid found it increasingly difficult to resist the enchanting voice. Simone saw her frightened face. Risa was definitely not herself now, and she was under the influence of a curse. She only spoke. Her body did not obey at all, and Simone realized that the girl had fallen under the influence of the curse because of the news about Anna. She pulled her by the hand, but something with great force pulled Risa in the other direction, while the maid, regaining consciousness for a second, asked for help. And the necromancer understood that if this continued, the maid would drag her away with her, and she could barely stand on her feet. Risa, a fragile girl with frightened eyes, was drawn as if by a magnet into the darkness, from where an indistinct whisper emanated, but at the same time filled her heart with horror. The maid clearly heard the voice of Anna's friend, and her mind was losing control, submitting to the will of the dark entity. Step by step she approached her nightmare, guided by a voice that promised only death. The cold stone floor hit her knees, but Simone, ignoring the pain, clutched the maid's hand tighter. Risa twitched like a doll, trying to escape Simone's grip, her eyes filled with madness. Risa twitched like a bird caught in a net. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and hoarse, incoherent sounds came from her throat. Terribly enchanted by the curse, she saw her friend Anna in front of her, who allegedly called her. Bony fingers reached out to Risa, promising an embrace that would end her life and take her to a world of eternal darkness. Simone understood that there was almost no time left. She needed to act decisively before Risa completely became a puppet in the hands of a sinister force. The necromancer screamed loudly for the sinister entity in the form of Anna to immediately release the maid. Long threads of darkness wriggled as if alive, drawing in the remnants of light, already meager in this damned mansion. Simone grabbed these threads, and looking at the ghost, she had only one question: could she call this creature Anna? They seemed to be woven from coagulated blood, like arteries torn from the body of the house itself, a whisper, malicious, emanating from them, penetrating the mind and sowing the seeds of fear. A corpse-like creature, vaguely resembling Anna's friend, beckoned the maid Risa closer to him, her features now distorted by a death mask of decay. She understood that the battle was not only with the dead man, but also with Risa's memories, with her tender soul, susceptible to manipulation and deception. Now Simone was asking Risa to be patient for a little while, and something had to be done to break the connection before the maid went over to the dark side. Determination flashed in Simone's eyes, and using magic she created a purple glowing ball in her hand and threw it towards the evil creature. They must act quickly, find the source of power feeding the darkness and destroy it, otherwise they will both become another dark chapter in the history of the cursed place. The necromancer tried to push the entity away with magic. A purple glow filled the room. Simone directed a purple beam straight into the creature's heart. A storm erupted around them. Vortices of energy swept away dust and debris, and scarlet threads, like wounded snakes, wriggled helplessly in the air. Finally, the connection was severed, and Risa was thrown towards Simone, falling to the floor, weak and disoriented, struggling to comprehend what had happened. The image of Anna, the one she knew and loved, fought in her mind with the terrifying simulacrum created by the darkness of the mansion. Simone leaned over Risa, breathing heavily, checking her condition, her head a chaos of fragments of memories mixed with nightmarish visions. The girl asked if the curse had disappeared, but Simone understood that in order to remove it, one had to know what it was, and it had not gone away yet. After letting the girl breathe, Simone asked the maid to tell her what had happened and why she had followed the voice. The darkness played with her memory, slipping in false images, weaving a treacherous web of love and fear. The girl said that she was just walking down the corridor and suddenly heard Anna's voice calling her to come closer. Everything happened in a blur, and the maid couldn't even answer what exactly happened at that moment. She only remembered that when she came to, she was here, and Simone was already next to her. The maid was incredibly frightened, and Simone suggested that they go back to their room as quickly as possible and slam the door. She knew she couldn't let fear paralyze her, that she had to pull herself together and help Simone fight this evil. Risa couldn't believe that the necromancer was really going to go into the dark corridor where an ominous darkness was raging right now. She rushed towards the girl, grabbed her by the waist, screaming that she should under no circumstances go there and that it was very dangerous. Risa was even ready to go with her, but the necromancer firmly stated that a maid had no business there, because she came to this estate precisely to carry out all the most dangerous tasks. Risa only promised to return to her room as soon as possible and asked Mrs. Simone to be extremely careful. And the necromancer was getting ready to have some fun in order to deal with the terrible curse again. The heroine decided to see what was inside, and after passing through the corridor she went up quite far, but there was absolutely nothing here. The lady had a clear feeling that Anna had not disappeared completely, and her energy was still hovering here. Simone felt the magic pulsing through her veins, warning her of danger in this place. The darkness was thick and tangible. Hearing strange rustling sounds, she felt his presence as a predator feels its prey. It was an entity, and Simone saw a long, naked tail, like a rat's, scurry under the rickety sideboard. Now much became clear to the necromancer, and it seemed the entity was not going to show itself anymore today, which meant it was time for it to return. The necromancer was warned that at some point the maid would definitely return and behave exactly the same as before. After she disappears, you should under no circumstances look her in the eyes, and especially try to talk to her. Anna returned the next morning as if nothing had happened, and the maids looked at her with fear. Everyone understood that the girl would not return as she was before, but she behaved exactly the same as the previous Anna. The necromancer understood that Anna was not herself at all, so she wanted to let the entity manifest as quickly as possible and asked the maids to leave the room. Simone pretended nothing was happening, sipping the aromatic green tea that the fake Anna had brought her. Ren arrived to see her today and immediately noticed the strange atmosphere, declaring a new curse. The girl asked the young man if he had heard about the imposter rats wandering around the mansion. Ren heard about this for the first time, and the necromancer told him about a legend that was circulating in the village where she used to live. This legend was about a rat that ate the nail clippings of the owner of the house for a long time, and then turned into him. While the owner was away, the rat played his role, which caused confusion in the village about who was who. In the end, everyone believed the rat. The real owner was driven out, considered a fake, and it really was a terrible story. After hearing the strange legend, the young man could not understand what was going on and why the girl was talking about this. Simone admitted that she simply suddenly remembered this legend and decided to tell the young man about it. But the shadow that Anna cast on the wall was in the shape of a huge, angry rat. Simone wondered if Ren should have been busy searching for the magic stone at this time, and she wanted to know what brought him here today. She was sure he was wandering somewhere in a distant village in order to find the magic stone as quickly as possible. There had been no progress in this matter yet. The search continued, and today the young man arrived to respond to her proposal. Simone was surprised because she had not expected to discuss this topic today, which she had completely forgotten about after yesterday's incident. Ren looked worried, as if he had really been thinking about her proposal for a long time. He even stood up from his chair and, putting his hand to his chest, declared that from now on he was ready to become her loyal employee. To be honest, even Simone didn't expect this from the Crown Prince, and apparently things were really bad in the imperial family. Well, at least now she had a worker with excellent skills, and the necromancer was incredibly happy about it. She decided that the young man should work a little, and when the demon lord was reborn, he could be released. The lady admitted that she really hoped for further cooperation, and he responded in kind. But in fact, the master had other plans. He decided to be with this girl in order to do everything to remove the curse from his father. Since the heroes had become much closer to each other, the young man decided to question Madame Simone and learn as much as possible about her. However, the heroine already guessed that he would suspect something and would obviously start asking questions soon. The young man waited for an answer, and Simone wondered whether to tell him the whole truth or just lie. She didn't care at all what others thought of her, and the secrets of the cursed mansion would be kept only here. Telling someone about her true nature was not easy. She feared rejection, hatred, everything that usually haunts necromancers. Perhaps this would affect their relationship, and the silence after his question was oppressive. Simone told Ren that she was a necromancer, and his eyes reflected a whole range of emotions from surprise and disbelief to barely noticeable fear. In fact, the young man asked the question on purpose. He suspected this, pretending not to understand anything, and asked if there were still necromancers left in the Empire. Simone said she was sitting right in front of him, which meant there were still such people in the Empire. The girl, her blood-red eyes flashing, angrily asked if the young man really had any problems because she was a necromancer. But there was one more question that was bothering the young man, and after clearing his throat, he decided to ask it right now. He was interested in what kind of relationship the girl had with the Duke of Illiston, and it didn't seem like it was just a job. Simone was indeed connected to the Duke simply by work, but for some reason the young man could not believe it. The girl admitted that this does not mean at all that the Duke is her boss, and she is his subordinate. In all matters, the necromancer considered herself the main one, and this was a very important point in her position. She offered to lift the curse on the estate, which had tormented its inhabitants for 300 years, and in exchange received a guarantee of a comfortable life until she came of age. With such a contract, everything became clear to Ren, and that was all he wanted to know from his colleague. The young man asked the girl if she had any questions for him, since they now had a completely different relationship. All this time, he carefully hid his identity, but she knew that even if she asked about it, he was unlikely to answer her. She had enough information about his abilities and ability to keep secrets. Simone asked if it would probably take a long time to find the magic stone, but Ren had already asked everyone in the village, but no one had heard of the red stone. Suddenly, the lady asked him to complete the task within a week, and there was no time to wait any longer. Surprised, Ren asked if this wasn't a long-term assignment and why she suddenly decided to set a deadline. But when it came to saving lives, there were hardly any long-term or short-term tasks, and Simone asked for the stone to be brought as quickly as possible. And she warned that if he couldn't cope, he could take more people, and all expenses would be at the Duke's expense. He was interested in what the necromancer herself would do while the search for the magic stone was underway. Simone laughed when Ren suggested that she would be idle all this time, and was that really what he thought? The necromancer was going to remove other curses and offered to see Ren when he found the stone. When Ren left the mansion, Simone went to the window and began to closely examine his silhouette. At that moment, she heard a familiar, gentle voice, and it was definitely her personal maid. The girl stood behind her and asked why Mr. Wren had come and if he had any questions. Anna admitted that although he had come at her request, strangers had begun to visit the mansion regularly, so she felt a bit uneasy. Simone understood perfectly well that she should not talk to the maid under any circumstances, but she turned around and looked into her eyes, because somehow the curse had to be lifted. She asked the surprised Anna who she really was, and the entity in her body certainly didn't expect such a turn of events. Anna's face instantly changed from sweet and kind to sinister, and a sly smile appeared. Her skin turned gray, as if it had been drunk, and her eyes filled with an unholy flame, reflecting the darkness that was eating her from within. Anna, or what was left of her, convulsed in agony, her body twisting into unnatural positions. The entity understood. It was revealed, and in an instant nothing remained of the former Anna. Her twisted lips were stretched into a terrible grin, revealing sharp, unnaturally long teeth. Thin, pulsating threads, like living veins, spread across her body, absorbing into the skin and weaving like a web. Simone tried to tear them off, but in vain. The threads held tightly, as if glued to her flesh, and any effort only increased the pain. Jaws lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth snapped in the air, producing a blood-curdling sound. Another maid ran into the room with her assistant, and they saw a truly terrible sight. The residents of the mansion were so overcome with fear that they could barely breathe, and no one understood what was happening there. An entity with huge teeth and Anna's hair grabbed Simone's hand. The grip was dead, as if it was squeezing the necromancer's bones. Simone screamed for the freak to let go of her hand, but the teeth, huge and sharp, pierced her palm. The necromancer grabbed the entity by the hair, the only reminder of Anna, the once kind and sweet servant. Simone tried to tear them off, but in vain. The threads held tightly, as if glued to her flesh, and any effort only increased the pain. Thick, black drops of blood dripped onto the floor, corroding the stone slabs, and the toothy entity's grip weakened, allowing the necromancer to pull her hand free. Simone tore the flesh from the entity's face, shreds of gray, dead skin flying away to reveal the pulsating mass of bone beneath. The entity realized that now everyone saw its true form. It had only one way out: to run as fast and as far as possible. Instead of legs, she had ugly feet with sharp claws, squelching in their own blood. The damned Anna began to retreat hastily, as if seeking shelter. The remains of Anna's face transformed into a nightmarish mask, distorted into a grimace of despair. Despite the intense pain, Simone screamed. The entity couldn't be allowed to escape, and it needed to be dealt with right now. But the damned creature turned into a huge, terrible rat with a long, vile tail and began to run away. Simone shouted loudly for the young man to help her grab the cursed entity and started running towards it. The maids, in fear, seeing a huge rat with a bloody face in front of them, understood that this was definitely not their friend Anna. Simone said that instead of Anna, a cursed monster appeared, and one shouldn't think that there was anything left of their friend in it. With a deep breath, she released the accumulated mana, the energy surging out of her, coloring the air an ominous purple. Simone, the necromancer, her fingers trembling with tension, felt the last of her mana tighten into a tight, pulsating knot in her chest. The necromancer realized that it was very difficult to run and accumulate mana at the same time. If she had known about this for a long time, she would have taken up sports, deciding instead to create an amulet filled with dark power. Simone didn't loosen her grip, focusing her will on holding on to the entity so that the vile rat couldn't escape. But at some point the necromancer understood, she stopped, and there was definitely nothing more she could do, because her strength was leaving her. She decided to hell with lifting the curse, and first thing she had to do was catch this nasty creature. Taking off her boot, the necromancer deftly threw it at the head of the fleeing huge entity and hit it squarely in the head. The vile creature actually stopped after a strong blow, and the heroine herself did not even expect that she would hit. Finally, she succeeded in achieving what she wanted, and the huge rat-shaped creature fell to the floor. Black streams of dark energy erupted around the entity, leaving a small mouse with a long tail lying on the floor. She continued to squeak, and the necromancer grabbed the little mouse by the tail, which now looked completely harmless. She looked at it and realized that it really was a small rat, cursed and sinister. The lady didn't even notice how the Duke approached her and quietly asked what was going on here and where all the noise was coming from. Simone released the evil rat and admitted that she was only here to catch the cursed entity. Blood was running down the girl's hand, and with a deft movement of her foot, she stepped on the rat's tail so that it could not escape anywhere else. Simone told the Duke that this was one of the curses described in the manual, which she was able to deal with. The Duke didn't understand why they were talking about a curse, but there was a strange rat lying under the girl's foot. In fact, he thought the necromancer would rest all this time until the magic stone was found. But to his great surprise, the necromancer was busy with other curses, risking her life every day. The Duke asked if another curse had been lifted, but Simone asked him not to rush into it. In fact, she simply caught the rat, but did not remove the curse that was placed on it. Usually when you eliminate the source, everything is solved, but Simone had never killed living beings before. The Duke asked if it was really necessary to kill this pathetic rat, which already seemed about to die, to lift the curse. He thoughtfully took out his sword and was ready to finish off the damned creature so that it would disappear from the estate forever. With one blow, he cut the rat in half, and a huge pillar of light appeared from the dark entity. The Duke had no time for empty pity when it came to dark curses. The Duke warned that if the necromancer did not intend to flood the mansion with her blood, she should at least heal her hand. And only now did Simone notice that her hand was indeed covered in blood and huge wounds from the sharp fangs of the damned creature. She really began to feel inhuman pain. The maid rushed to her aid. Simone screamed in pain. The maid asked her to calm down, and the Duke understood that he should intervene in this matter. He asked the butler to immediately send a request and help the girl. He ordered that a healer be found immediately who could come to the mansion right away. The price was of no importance to the Duke, and he ordered that someone be found who could arrive as quickly as possible. But Simone had not yet finished the work she had started, and begged the Duke to find Anna as soon as possible. There is a large arch at the end of the stairs in the basement, and the necromancer said that Anna should be there right now. Most likely the maid suffered from this imposter rat, who was trying to pretend to be her all this time. Anna may be in danger and needs help, and the necromancer asked the Duke to find her and cure her. Her request sounded very excited. The Duke understood that this was truly a very important matter. He asked the butler which archway he should go to, but he only remained silent in surprise. Having said that, there never was and never could be any arch in the place described by the necromancer. The butler said that in the basement at the end of the stairs there is only a walled-up wall. He even suggested that perhaps Simone was mistaken, but the Duke understood that it was unlikely that a necromancer could be mistaken. No one could understand what kind of arch they were talking about because all their lives there had really just been a wall there. However, the Duke warned, the necromancer said that there was a maid named Anna there and asked the butler to check. After this incident, they say that Anna was found in the basement corridor, and now she is fine. The girl was still unconscious, but a doctor had arrived to see her, and she would soon come to her senses. As Simone said, Anna was indeed hurt, but her wounds were much larger and deeper, and so serious that amputating her fingers would have been the best solution. Thanks to the Duke asking for help from a healer, the girl is now slowly recovering. She would probably be able to return to her normal life tomorrow, and the maids were incredibly worried about her. As usual, Simone managed to save an innocent soul, and she was very glad that Anna remained alive. The maid remained in the girl's room and asked if necromancers really had the power of healing. She begged Simon to somehow stop the bleeding and asked how she could even just chase after her with a wounded arm. The maid understood that the necromancer was probably in great pain, but she did it to save her friend. And despite her agitated state, the girl understood that Simone had done everything right. She bowed low before her bed and thanked the necromancer for saving her friend. Everyone knew perfectly well that if it weren't for Simone, Anna would have been dead long ago. The maid also decided to apologize for her past rudeness when they first met the mistress. The conversation was about the time Simone found herself in a new room on the first day, and the maid was rude to her. Falling onto the bed, the girl admitted that there was no need to thank her. After all, she did it for Anna and wanted to save her, and if it had been someone else, she would have simply pretended that she didn't know anything. These words sent shivers down the maid's spine, and she realized that she was truly facing a devilish lady. With trembling hands, she crumpled the snow-white apron, feeling a chill of horror run through her body. Turning around, the maid admitted that she was still incredibly grateful to the necromancer for her help. Terrible rumors had already spread among the estate's servants about how Simone had managed to find the missing Anna. The rumors grew with each passing day. The maids passed information to each other, telling terrible stories. A few days later, Anna was already completely fine, and thanks to the healer, her hand healed without a single scar. But she couldn't sit idly by, no matter how much Simone tried to persuade her to rest a little, always shifting her work onto others. Besides, she was sure that she was already so healthy that she could even rejoice and run. Simone suggested that the maid go somewhere today, and Anna accepted her offer with interest. The lady reminded him that they had recently agreed to take a walk around the village, and now was just the time to unwind. She asked the maid not to forget the hair dye, and the delighted Anna promised to change her clothes, pack her things, and come back. After all the incidents, Simone felt she needed a little rest to gather her strength. They arrived at the village, and as soon as Simone got out of the carriage, she immediately noticed the strange chaos around her. 300 years ago, this place could have been called a city, and Simone couldn't even believe that this was really the Archduke's property. They say that even 200 years ago this place was a decent place, but now everything here is completely different. The maid, Kaylee, warned Simone that the village was much more dangerous than she thought, especially for a woman who looked rich. Since the master became the head of the family, security has been established here and food supplies have been supplied. But in the old days, the master refused the support of the population, and the doors of the mansion were locked. Simone asked Bam what he knew about this place, but the young man was from another village called Herten. The necromancer was indeed curious about this place, but as soon as she reported it, she felt something strange. A ghostly blue hand reached towards the necromancer's face, leaving a faint frosty mark on her face. The ghost kept repeating one word, die, and it was the same entity that had haunted her in the orphanage. Suddenly, she straightened up sharply and looked straight at the ghost, a cold fire splashing in her eyes, and an ominous smile playing on her lips. The necromancer had not seen this ghost for a long time, so she was sure that he had disappeared, but he probably simply could not have entered the mansion with her. She didn't care at all that the ghosts continued to stick to her. She wasn't afraid of such entities at all, and a smiling man approached the heroes and turned his attention to the beautiful lady. He asked what had brought such a noble person to such a remote place, and Simone was not surprised that attention was immediately drawn to her. Today she came for some magic hair dye, and the man who was the salesman at the magic shop thought it was an incredible pleasure. He offered to try the magic paint that the ruler of the lands used, and all the silk and colored paper from here went straight to the Duke's house. The salesperson asked what color the lovely lady would like to purchase, and they also had any shade to order. He suggested that the girl take her time and look around properly, and Simone began to closely examine the magic flasks. She was only interested in one question: how long would this paint last? And the choice in the magic shop was truly huge. The merchant warned that with proper care the paint should last a whole week, and he had even heard that magicians were able to preserve the color for a whole month. This rule only worked for mages because the paint was made using mana. Anna said that those who have a good command of mana can make the color not fade at all. Simone smiled and decided to take 2 bottles of each color, and Anna wondered why the lady needed so many. The necromancer wanted to buy more vials because she understood that they wouldn't be able to visit this place often anyway. There was no question of money at all, since she was fully sponsored by the Duke himself. Having made a good purchase at the magic shop, Simone was delighted, and the merchant politely showed the girls away. Anna asked where they were going next, and it was a beautiful sunny day outside. Wanting to buy a book, Simone wondered if there probably wasn't even a bookstore in this village. Anna suggested that the girl was deeply mistaken, and even in this village there is a perfectly decent bookstore. They walked to the next shop, and indeed a variety of books were visible on its shelves. It didn't look like much, but there were actually a lot of books there. True, they only sold old books here, but the necromancer understood that it was better than nothing. Entering the bookstore, they heard a man's voice asking who had decided to visit this wonderful place. They were met by an old man with long gray hair and a beard, who was definitely not expecting visitors today. Arriving unannounced, Simone greeted them, but for some reason the elder asked them to leave. The maid was there for the first time, and Simone asked if he really wouldn't sell them anything. Bam suggested that perhaps his main job was more important to him, which is why he didn't pay any attention to the visitors. The elder sold not only books here, but also other things, even things that cannot be touched. Everyone was sure that he definitely couldn't drive away the only customers, so the maid asked them to simply ignore his words. Simone said she came for a book, and the elder was surprised, as if there was not a single book in his shop. He muttered that the city was full of normal bookstores and asked why an aristocrat would drag herself to such a hole. And his attitude towards customers was really rude, because he asked them to look at the books as soon as possible and leave. Simone decided to ignore his rudeness and needed to find a book about the ducal family. She slowly went through each book and realized that there really were a lot of books about necromancers. As soon as the old man heard about the necromancers, he confessed that the girl had come to such a remote place, and also extremely sinister books. When she asked if there were any books about necromancers, he continued to answer rudely without giving a specific answer to her question. Bam warned that searching for such books was a crime and asked the lady to stop doing what dishonors the honor of the master. For the heroine, there was hardly anything worse than her work for him, and she simply asked him to find the necessary books. The elder found this surprising and asked if anyone was really interested in the story of a fallen aristocrat. Simone did not understand what was strange about the fact that the resident was interested in his master, and the elder noted that she was not a noblewoman at all. But even for an ordinary commoner, this was quite strange because she needed magic books. Whether aristocrat or commoner, the people of the Luan Empire no longer care about the Illiston family, and many don't even know that such a family exists. The elder said that everyone thought that this family had disappeared about 300 years ago, and Simone was surprised by his words. The more questions she asked, the more rude the old man became to her, not understanding who would be interested in fallen aristocrats. And in his opinion, if the Illiston name still meant something, then this family would certainly have flourished. Suddenly Anna shouted she had finally found that very book about the ducal family. She also managed to find books about necromancers, and Simone thought that they had come here for a reason. She asked the elder how much the two books cost, and he asked her to give her as much money as she could afford. The heroes finally managed to acquire all the necessary goods, and they decided to go to the nearest tavern to have a bite to eat. Simone had never been to such an establishment before and looked around carefully. Anna did not often go to taverns, only occasionally, when she was very hungry while running an errand. Anna even asked if the lady was sure that such a place really suited her. It wasn't a restaurant, but a dive where you could eat cheaply, and even Anna knew that the food wasn't of very high quality. Simone didn't understand why the maid was so worried about this, as if there was some kind of danger lurking there. The necromancer smiled and stated that she was also an ordinary commoner, so it didn't matter to her. The menu here was not very varied, but even from this there was something to choose from. He still managed to have a tasty lunch in a cheap tavern, and surprisingly the food here turned out to be tolerable. The necromancer began to leaf through the book she had purchased about the biography of the ducal family, and she already knew everything that was written there. She couldn't find any new information about the curse or anything like that. Most of the books on the market are simply collections of rumors about the Illiston family. They say that even family members do not know when and why a terrible curse was placed on them. Perhaps no one will ever know until the head of the family who lived 300 years ago tells this story himself. Anna really did know a little and knew some information about the ducal family that was reliable. When she first got a job there, she was even scared to work in such a place, but now she had a completely different feeling. Now it was the turn of the book about necromancers, and Simone was even surprised that such a book was on sale in the bookstore. She opened the book right in the middle to get at least a little familiarity with the information written there. The book contained a description and external characteristics of necromancers, their origin, and also the first case of their discovery. Simone also found information about the fall of the last necromancer, Anasis, who was executed. Apparently, few people cleaned this tavern, and the table was so dusty that the heroine couldn't even read a book. She turned to Bam's assistant, confessing that she had some interesting questions. She decided to ask about the village in Herton and how trade was surviving there, and the young man told her that the local economy relied on secret visitors. Hunters, killers, middlemen, and the like. Rumor has it, everyone who is involved in something suspicious flocks there. The young man could not tell about this earlier, but probably the owner of that bookstore was also an informant. This place is owned by a family that the state doesn't care about, and there were so few people there that there was no management. The Duke tried to improve the conduct of affairs, made a lot of efforts, but there were things that could not be done about. The young man himself didn't know the details, but as a ruler, the Duke was lucky that the village's economy was developing at least this way. Anna was sure that now that Madame Simone was there, the Duke's affairs could go much better. The necromancer smiled, because she was only lifting the curse from the mansion and was not involved in other matters at all. Suddenly, the necromancer Simone became alert. Her gaze was directed to the side. Something was bothering her. An experienced sense, honed by years of practice and thousands of creatures raised from the dead, signaled danger. Anna also noticed that Simone, for some reason, was looking intently in the direction where there was no one yet. The maid didn't even have time to understand what could have happened, but the necromancer asked her not to look under any circumstances. And today, Simone thought that everything should go calmly and smoothly, but a new challenge awaited her. A man entered the tavern, and at first the girl thought he was just wearing some kind of long black hat. The necromancer saw hundreds of eyes in the darkness, entities, indescribable and shimmering, surrounding the man, clinging to him like a parasite to its host. The man seemed not to notice them. He stood motionless, as if enchanted, his face expressing a strange mixture of delight and horror. While the necromancer looked at the ghost with stunned eyes, the man approached her and asked if he could ask her something. It seemed he didn't even suspect that a ghost with dark eyes lived next to him. The man admitted that he was there for the first time and was a little lost, and asked where the home improvement store was. Dark, as if carved from the night shadows, she crossed her bony arms over his shoulder, like a faithful but sinister companion. Simone replied, "The store is about 2 blocks from here, if you go left," continuing to peer intently into the entity. The man smiled and admitted how good it was that he hadn't gone far while the dark creature sat upside down on his shoulder. He realized that he had never seen the young lady at a banquet before, and since he had never seen such a beautiful lady, it was likely that she did not like social events. Simone only prayed that the man with the ominous ghost would leave her as soon as possible. He offered to drink tea and get to know each other, extending his hand to Simone, which was completely covered with the hair of the dark entity. The necromancer couldn't even touch her, and said that if he came to such a place, it would be impolite to ask her name. The man decided not to embarrass the girl anymore, but the dark entity continued to stare at her with a huge number of eyes. Those eyes peered into Simone like icy needles, like 2 coals burning with unnatural energy. The ghost on his shoulder twisted like a snake, its bony legs unnaturally long and thin, reaching almost to the necromancer. There was an ancient, primordial malice in this being, an energy capable of destroying entire worlds. And the ghost's bony black legs were level with the girl's face, who looked at what was happening in shock. She realized that the ghost was about to fall, and screaming, she stepped back from the man, because unfortunately, only she saw this ghost. Anna stood nearby and could not understand at all what was happening here, looking at the strange behavior of the lady. Simone closed her eyes and leaned over, suddenly falling silent, and the maid began to worry about her mistress. The necromancer was frightened. The ghost was ready to fall right on her, but as soon as she opened her eyes, there was nothing left. She didn't want the dark creature to touch her at all, but fortunately, nothing happened. The young man stood nearby and did not understand why the girl was behaving this way, and her behavior really seemed strange. In an instant, the dark creature suddenly seemed to dissolve into thin air and vanished without a trace. The young man asked if everything was okay with the girl, but she decided to take her books as quickly as possible and leave there. Thinking that she might have just imagined the ghost, Simone tried to understand what had just happened. Even after picking up the books, she still felt a strange feeling, and her bones trembled violently. She asked the maid and Bam to get ready to head back to the duchy. The necromancer couldn't understand what had just happened, where the ghost had come from, or why it had disappeared without a trace. But she decided to return to the mansion as quickly as possible. Night fell over the cursed mansion. The thick darkness seemed to pulsate like a living creature, enveloping its stone walls. The 2 maids were still standing in the corridor, happily discussing something among themselves. Kaylee noticed the girls and addressed them, as they should be busy with their work. The lady was indignant, asking why the maids were standing around doing nothing, and whether they had any special assignments. As soon as the girls saw their partner, they immediately ran to do their chores, because they understood that punishment could await them. The maids just wanted to take a break, and Kaylee acted like she was the only one working there. Madame Simone suddenly came out of her room and turned to the maids, confessing that she had something to talk about. She held some papers in her hands and asked the maids to each take 10 of them. The maids didn't understand what it was, but the necromancer explained that she had bought it today in the village. From that moment on, she was going to make magical amulets so that the girls would no longer be in danger of being cursed. The necromancer put her power into this paper and declared that it must be carried with you and the sheets cut into small pieces. Since there were a lot of sheets of paper, she suggested cutting them up little by little while the ladies cleaned the mansion. Kaylee looked at the sheets of paper in confusion and asked why they had to do this. The other maids didn't mind, but Kaylee was indignant. If this was the work of a necromancer, then she should deal with the paperwork herself. In fact, Simone wanted to help the maids and stated that it was not her job at all. She did this because she didn't want any of them to suffer from the curse like Anna had. So now every maid can protect herself, and Simone did this partly for herself, of course. Kaylee realized that the necromancer just wanted to help them and asked how she was feeling. Today, Anna told how she felt unwell in the village, and this was the case when the girl saw a ghost. After thinking for a bit, Simone realized that she had definitely not imagined this ghost, and she clearly saw each of its eyes. And on this man's shoulder there was definitely some kind of entity, dark and ominous, with long tufts of hair. It was obvious that the entity was looking for something here, but it didn't even come close to Simone. Besides, there was another interesting fact, and the ghost sitting on her shoulders also disappeared without a trace. Before this, he had always been by her side, but then he ran away as if he sensed danger. Everything was fine until the maid reminded her of this story, and she asked about the food and whether she wanted to listen to a scary story. But the lady asked the mistress to forget, and she asked not because she was really interested. Simone suggested stopping the chatter and making an amulet for the gentleman, which he also needed. That same evening, the butler offered the gentleman dinner, but for some reason he had been refusing everything in recent days. Floria was the same way. She always left more than half of the food, but she was fine. The gentleman decided to inquire about the Adventurers Guild, and the butler told him that today they had finally found a magic stone. The Duke was surprised that they had actually managed to find the stone from the legend, and asked why the butler had not reported it immediately. To verify the authenticity of the magic stone, the guild went to the magician Orkin. But during this task, some strange thief stole the stone, and even the seekers were unable to cope with him. The Duke couldn't believe how some stranger could steal the stone from experienced people if Ren was the best swordsman. The thief was also good with a sword. He killed all the seekers with one blow and escaped with the jewel. The matter was incredibly urgent, and the Duke was worried that everything was not going as he wanted. Both Floria and Jace are losing their original appearance every day, consumed by dark magical entities. He still believed the words of the necromancer, who wasn't even sure she could lift the curse, but there was an unusual inspiration on her face. If the Duke had known about the necromancer's existence earlier, if he had tried to lift the curse, his family would have been different. As soon as he thought of Madame Simone, she seemed to sense it and knocked on the door of his office. Something brought the girl to the Duke so late in the evening, or you admitted that she brought him something. She held some strange cardboard box in her hands and happily brought it to the master. Simone said she made a powerful magical amulet using her mana. Since it was still in development, it might not function quite correctly yet. But the necromancer was sure that it was worth at least trying so that no one else would suffer like the maid Anna. The Duke realized that the necromancer was truly worried about the mansion's inhabitants and was diligently carrying out her tasks. Even though she had to work hard to make as many amulets as possible, she still tried. The master thanked her not only for the amulet, but also for saving the maid, since it was only thanks to the necromancer that this girl remained alive. In fact, the Duke just wanted to call the necromancer to tell him the news about the magic stone, and he believed that everything could still be fixed. He didn't try to hide the fact that the situation seemed to have become a little more complicated than he had imagined, and no one could believe that someone would think of stealing the magic stone from the Seekers. He stole something that may be the saint's passion, and they say he quickly dealt with the Seekers and stole the stone. The lady didn't understand why they didn't just bring the stone to her, but went to some magician. They went to the right person, and the Duke was sure that the girl knew something about him. The magician Orkin, it was impossible not to know his name. He appears in the first season of the novel and remains until the finale, being the best friend of the main character. It is clear that, having received the stone from the legends, Ren will go to the Orkin, whom he trusts the most. No one could understand what kind of madman stole this stone if only the necromancer knew about it. The guild seekers reported that they might be late due to the theft, and just in case, the Duke suggested thinking about what to do if the guild didn't meet the deadline. Simone knew perfectly well that if this wasn't the right magic stone, then there was no way to lift the curse from Jace now, and it was a complete failure. After discussing all the details with the Duke, she returned to her room, where she saw something strange. For some reason, the maids were in her room and hadn't left yet, and Anna was carefully making the bed linen. Kaylee put on a serious expression and turned to the lady, probably wanting to tell her something. She became embarrassed and thanked the mistress for the magical amulets she had provided, although she had previously said that they were useless things for servants. Kaylee had been working in this estate for a long time, and she was still afraid of curses, and for her, scary things remained scary anyway. Anna asked the lady what kind of strange magical amulet was lying on her table. They looked completely different from the ones the necromancer had given to all the maids today. She reached out her hand to the black piece of paper, but Simone asked her not to touch it under any circumstances. The necromancer said that this amulet is intended to drive out evil spirits, and it is truly special. Simone warned that if an ordinary person touched it, they could be absorbed by the energy, so the servants should not touch it under any circumstances. Frightened, Kaylee asked how a girl could leave something so dangerous in plain sight unattended. But Simone had already warned him not to touch him, and she had never before spent so much effort, feeling very tired. The girl collapsed onto the bed while the maid assured her that it was better to put the dangerous black amulet out of sight. She suggested that the lady lie down in bed normally before falling asleep, but Simone no longer cared at all about her words. Having settled comfortably on the huge soft bed, the necromancer was glad that this difficult day had finally come to an end. She had never felt so tired, and removing the magical curses took too much of her strength. So as soon as her head hit the pillow, Simone immediately closed her eyes, wanting to plunge into sweet sleep. The next second she realized that she would hardly be able to sleep in this damned mansion today. There was no peace in the house, and the chandelier hanging in her room began to shake. The servants certainly shouldn't have been working until now, and none of them would have been wandering around the estate making so much noise. Simone picked up the black magic amulet and wondered what kind of curse had come this time. It was still good that she had given the servants an amulet each, and at least nothing should happen today, and the heroine was planning to sleep peacefully. She closed her eyes and began to mentally count sheep in order to fall asleep as quickly as possible, but that night the mansion was restless again. Simone slept soundly all night due to fatigue, and in the morning, when she left the room, she saw a crowd in the corridor. The maids were standing outside her room, and Simone yawned and asked why it was so noisy that night. Anna tried to explain something in a stuttering voice, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. She understood that in any case, only the lady could handle this while Simone was trying to figure out what had happened. Anna asked if she hadn't heard anything strange that night, since something was clearly happening in the mansion. The maids were awakened in the middle of the night by a dull sound, which kept all the servants awake until dawn. Everyone heard it, but even if it was something bad, no one dared to check where the strange sound was coming from. And Simone had no other option but to assume that perhaps it was another ghost. She praised the maids, because in this mansion, if something strange happens, it is better not to go anywhere and stay in your places. Besides this dull sound, the maids heard something else, and the excited Anna was going to tell about it. Just this morning, the cook reported hearing a strange voice at dawn. The cook woke up quite early to prepare the kitchen and ingredients for today. He said that when he went to the kitchen, he heard a frightening female voice that seemed to be coming from all corners. After this information, the necromancer thought seriously and tried to understand what was going on here again. She promised to talk to the cook and then told Anna that she would like to go for a walk. She asked the maid to bring a magic manual from her room to understand what curse had fallen upon the mansion again. Since the red tree in front of the gate disappeared, the girl noticed that the estate's residents had begun to take care of the beautiful garden again. Now this place looked completely different. There were fragrant flowers and green grass everywhere. Simone went out for some fresh air and started reading the manual to figure out what was going on. Anna carefully poured hot tea into her mug, and today the heroine looked too thoughtful. The girl had already leafed through the entire manual, but unless her eyes were deceiving her, she couldn't find the information she needed. Simone even decided to start studying the manual from the very beginning, because it was possible that she had missed something. But no matter how much she looked, the manual didn't say anything about mysterious footstep-like sounds or a woman's voice in the middle of the night. The necromancer was very young, but she began to notice that something was happening to her vision. She asked Anna if there was any secret instruction among the servants regarding frightening sounds. The maid thought about it, but could not remember anything at all like what her mistress had said. Even the head maid, who had been working longer than her, didn't seem to understand what was happening tonight. And then the necromancer had only one place left where she could find out information, and it was about the owner of the estate. Anna warned that the gentleman was currently receiving a guest, and it was unlikely that he should be disturbed. Today, Mr. Renaissance and members of the Adventurers Guild arrived at the mansion, and they probably found something. Ren brought the master a box containing the very same magic stone from the ancient legend. It was a huge stone of a bright scarlet color, and the Duke stared at it, not believing his eyes. As soon as the young man opened the box, there was a knock on the door of the office, and it was Lady Simone on a visit. Ren, for some reason, was again extremely happy to see this girl and admitted that they had not seen each other for a very long time. Simone heard that the stone was stolen, but for some reason the young man still returned very quickly. Ren stated that he had promised to return by the appointed time, and the task was completed successfully. The young man really did a great job, and the Duke was surprised the necromancer knew he was here, but for some reason she didn't change the color of her hair and eyes. As soon as the heroine looked at the open box, she saw a magic stone and felt a strong aura emanating from it. This stone was definitely real, and this fact was confirmed by the magician Orkin, who said that this was the very same passion of the saint. Now that the necromancer had also confirmed this, the Duke said they could discuss further details. He wanted to know who exactly was the man who dared to steal the stone and how he knew about it. Ren said that he was the same adventurer, not affiliated with any guild, but he could use the sword's aura. Thinking about it, the young man assumed that his accomplices were also not simple, and each of them possessed dexterous skills. They seemed to have made significant progress in close combat and support, but the heroine couldn't believe his words. In this world, among all the possible guilds, there is hardly anyone who can control the aura of the sword and travel with strong allies. The young man was sure that they were not because of those who were raiding the village, but they still decided to steal the jewel. And from what was known, each of them had their own reasons, and at that moment the necromancer looked worried. Ren assured the gentleman that these were not bad people at all, and he probably already knew something about it. The young man said confidently that now these people are all part of his group, and they are truly good people. Simone finally realized that the kidnapper was the novel's main character, Abel, and no one else could have done it. Everything turned out to be too confusing, and Simone didn't even imagine that she would have to unravel such a tangle. She should have known earlier that in the history of this novel there were only a handful of people who could match Ren's skill and ball control. However, Abel's squad should now be near the border village, but for some reason they unexpectedly found themselves in a different place. And the magic stone, which in the original story everyone was supposed to learn about later, somehow ended up in their hands. As the story got going, unexpected events began to happen one after another, and the heroine assumed that perhaps it was her fault. Trying to think it all through, Simone realized that since Abel and Ren had suddenly crossed paths, history had to return to its previous course. The Duke noticed that the necromancer was thinking hard about something, but she did not want to reveal all the details. Simone decided to change the subject and said that she would like to hire Sir Ren to her staff to help. She needed the help of qualified people, and the Duke certainly did not expect such an offer. Simone called the young man competent, and as the Duke had already noted, he also knew about her personality. Besides, she was sure that relying on the guild in every matter was clearly not in the master's favor, and he would not be able to force everyone to remain silent. It was like a small child begging for a puppy while Simone was talking about Ren's qualities. The Duke understood that the young man could not stay in this estate and live and eat here like the girl. Ren asked the gentleman not to worry, admitting that he had his own personal home and did not need housing at all. He offered to go to work as usual, but asked to provide him with a guest room if necessary. The Duke asked not to worry about money and suggested that the necromancer simply guide him properly. Now that Simone had finally received the magic stone, the Duke wanted to know what she intended to do next. The servants said they heard strange sounds at night and felt uneasy, and he asked if she was going to investigate this matter first. Simone knew she should have mentioned it earlier and admitted she had more important things to do right now. First, she needed to save young Master Jace from being consumed by a terrible curse forever. So Simone admitted that the strange sounds weren't as important as this important matter that she wanted to deal with. From the Duke's worried face, one could tell that he was extremely worried about how everything would go. He offered his help, but the necromancer hardly needed anything, and for now it was difficult for her to say anything. Just in case, she asked for a healer to be prepared, and said that if she needed help, she would send Ren at the right time. As for the rumors circulating among the servants, she would like the Duke to deal with them as soon as possible. There was no mention anywhere of the muffled sounds that began to appear every night, and even the necromancer heard them every night. The Duke suggested that perhaps a new curse had appeared, one he had not known about before. The necromancer promised to sort out this issue as soon as possible and was about to leave the office, bowing politely to the gentleman. Following her was Mr. Wren, who probably wanted to talk to her about something. He asked how the girl wanted to save someone with the help of this stone, because it sounded absolutely unrealistic. If the legend is true, the magic stone only has healing powers, and it has no power to dispel the curse. Wren knew something about dark magic, the sorcery used by witches and necromancers. The Empire feared the dark magic they practiced, banned it, and in protest, the necromancers began to commit various atrocities, and eventually a conflict arose between the necromancers and the Empire. Simone wondered why the Empire considered dark magic so dangerous, since necromancers helped people in many ways. The young man suggested that perhaps the sacrifices were the reason, and the necromancers were banished from the Empire forever. And something was known today. In this mansion, there is someone who also knows about dark magic. At present, the Archduchess practices dark magic, and the necromancer knew this very well. The young man continued to follow her and asked her to stop for a moment, as he was hearing this information for the first time. He couldn't believe it. Dark magic in his own house, but she wasn't even a necromancer, just an ordinary noblewoman. Simone admitted that with someone's help this is indeed possible, but of course that someone is definitely not her. Dark magic required a living sacrifice, and the young man did not understand where the lady could find them in her estate. He was even afraid that the Duchess had really used the servants as victims, but that was not the case at all. Simone suggested that perhaps several of the missing servants had been sacrificed, but strictly speaking they were no longer alive. And in this mansion there is one person whom no one remembers, and there is no trace of him left in the world. The eldest son of the Illiston family, wiped off the face of the earth, and it has been more than 7 years since young Master Jace became a living sacrifice. The heroes stopped right in front of Duchess Floria's door, which no one was ever allowed to approach. Unexpectedly, Simone, despite all the rules, suggested that the young man look at the door, and this was too sudden. Smiling, the necromancer promised that they would just quickly take a look at what was inside and leave. The Duchess was not locked in this room, and Simone heard her coming out and wandering around the estate whenever she wanted. One day, she herself ran into her in the corridor, and from what she heard, she communicates with the gentleman quite often. Laughing, the lady asked if the frightened young man had no more questions, or if he needed a little more time to prepare. Ren touched the handle of the door to the Archduchess's chambers, trying his best to hide his excitement. He held the door handle tightly and asked if it was time to open it while Simone stood behind him. The young man was incredibly scared because no one had ever entered the lady's chambers, and it was unknown what was inside. The Duchess's face appeared in the doorway, her eyes, once sparkling with life and mischief, sunken into their sockets, surrounded by deep wrinkles. Seeing her pale face like a dead person, the young man felt a chill run down his spine. He certainly didn't expect the lady to look exactly as if he had seen a real ghost in front of him. He hurried to close the door as quickly as possible, so as never to see such blatant horror again. But the Archduchess did not let him close the door, holding out her bony hand. The lady abruptly opened the door, came out from behind her room, and headed straight towards the necromancer. The Duchess slowly turned her gaze to Simone, the necromancer, searching for a glimmer of hope, though in the depths of her gaze there was only despair. The curse not only devoured her body, but also deprived her of her voice, the ability to pray for help, conjuring her into an eternal silence of suffering. Her bony hands reached out to Simone, and from now on she was just a puppet in the hands of the curse, forced to carry out its evil will. Incredibly frightened, the young man stood with his mouth open. Now he was much more afraid than when he chopped down the damned tree. The Archduchess grabbed the girl by the hair, and the young man didn't even have time to notice how Simone's figure disappeared behind the door. The door slammed in Ren's face, and he started pounding his fists and yelling if Simone was okay. Hearing the screams, the maid stopped for a moment to find out what was shaking there. She saw a man from the guild, and everyone knew that this young man was the necromancer's assistant, but for some reason the girl herself was nowhere to be seen. The maid turned to Ren and warned him that these were her ladyship's chambers, and he could not make such a noise here. Holding the box with the magic stone tightly in his hands, Ren realized that he had to save Simone as soon as possible. He ran as fast as he could to the Duke's office to tell him what had just happened. The butler was indignant that the young man had burst into his lordship's office, and that this was definitely disrespectful. No one knew what had happened, and the out-of-breath young man was too afraid to say a word. He looked at the Duke and declared that something terrible had happened, and that the Duke definitely needed to intervene. And as soon as the master heard that Her Grace had dragged Simone into her chambers, his face turned pale with horror. The young man said that they went to break the curse, but Simon warned that today they just needed to survey the situation and find out a few things. They briefly outlined the general plan and opened the door slightly, and right behind it stood a lady as if waiting for them. Perhaps she could have overheard their conversation, but they didn't have time to ask questions. She suddenly jumped out and dragged the necromancer to her. After this, the door slammed shut, but the young man was still unable to see what was happening inside. Ren realized, seeing the Duke's frightened face, that they were talking about his son, Jace. Apparently, Simone had already managed to tell something about him, and indeed it was all about him. The room was too dark for Ren to catch a quick glance over her ladyship's shoulder before he could tell if anyone else was there. But honestly, even if there was someone there, it doesn't seem like a place like that would be suitable for a living person to live. He assumed that something terrible was happening in this room, and the young man was absolutely right about that. It even turned out to him that Jace could only exist in the memories of the estate itself, and he was definitely not alive now. Judging by the gentleman's reaction, it was as if he existed only in his memory, but she couldn't just go there. Ren asked if his son was there, why couldn't he know anything about his condition? If the gentleman was so worried about him, he could probably visit him himself at any time. The butler intervened in their conversation and objected, asking how the young man dared to speak like that in front of his master. He couldn't afford to just stand there and listen to this conversation, but the Duke sharply asked him to shut up. He understood that the young man was absolutely right, and there was not a drop of lies in his words about what was happening behind the secret doors. It had been quite a while since the gentleman had seen the child himself, and the butler could not understand what was going on. Everyone was talking about something. It was definitely just the master's son talking, but the butler knew nothing about it. Recently in his office, he asked if the gentleman had any secrets that he did not know about. Then the Duke replied that the butler would not be able to understand him anyway, and did not tell him anything. The gentleman only asked not to ask unnecessary questions, and he would also find out how everything would be resolved. So now the Duke was determined to deal with the pressing issue, and that was much more important. There was no peace in the cursed mansion, and the Duke grabbed the hilt of his sword as he stood in front of the mysterious room. He stated that now they should focus on getting the necromancer out of this room as quickly as possible. Behind the mysterious doors, real horror was happening, and the Duchess was trying to strangle Simone right now. With each passing second, the girl found it increasingly difficult to breathe, and her bright red eyes slowly closed. Simone seemed to feel that right now she was going to die at the hands of the damned Duchess, who had no intention of stopping. The damned lady was sure she needed another victim, and she was ready to do it again, because she believed that if she had one more chance, her damned son Jace could survive. She held her throat in a death grip as Simone tried to take at least one breath of air. She didn't understand how a damned girl who looked like a walking dead could be so strong. If she continued to strangle her, Simone knew that another minute would pass, and she would die right there in this damned room. Gathering her last strength, she tried to kick the Duchess right in the stomach, but it didn't work. Simone was sure she had definitely hit her, but for some reason the lady didn't even move, and she continued to sit on her body, tightly squeezing her throat, looking at the girl with devastated eyes. Now the damned lady only wanted the necromancer to die as quickly as possible, because she believed that this would save the life of her son. She was so absorbed in the curse that she didn't even understand what she was doing. She was trying to strangle an innocent lady right now. Ren knew every second counted, and he slammed the door with all his might, shouting Simone's name. It helped because the damn Duchess turned towards the door, and the girl had the slightest chance to get out. Simone managed to take a breath of air and screamed loudly for someone to come and help her. Suddenly, the Duchess abruptly let go of her and headed towards the door so that no one would disturb her anymore. There were bright crimson marks on the girl's throat, and Simone really thought that she was going to die right then and there. The Duchess was distracted by the noise outside the door, and Simone noticed a bloody sword lying right behind her. She understood that the Duke and Ren were trying to break into the room. If it weren't for these two, she would no longer be a tenant. The damn Duchess was incredibly irritated by the noise outside the door, and clutching her head, she screamed loudly. Simone realized that while they were distracting the Duchess, she had to hurry and find that damn Jace. She didn't even have time to look for him because he was in the very center of the room, which looked like a real hell. Right in the middle of the room stood a huge pole, to which was tied a young man in a white shirt with a bloody head. The sight was like something out of a real horror movie, and even the necromancer was surprised. She looked at the tied body of the young man and could not believe how the Duchess could do such a thing to someone. At that moment, the damned lady was already standing behind her, holding her dagger tightly in her hands. All this time, Ren was desperately trying to break down the door, and finally he succeeded, and a deafening roar was heard in the room. He saw that Lady Simone was still alive, and together with the Duke, he rushed to her aid. The damned Duchess managed to turn around and approach the girl, but the worst thing was that she had a dagger in her hands. Drops of blood began to flow down the necromancer's dress, but she managed to catch the weapon that was aimed straight at her stomach. The Duke shouted to the butler to go to the village immediately and bring the healer as quickly as possible. It was clear to everyone that the Duchess had wounded the necromancer, and she was still standing with her dagger drawn. Simone felt a strong pain in her stomach, and the young man screamed, "The healer will be here soon, but they need to get out of this terrible room." But the necromancer understood that she had not yet finished what she had started, and she turned to the damned Duchess. The Duke managed to capture the lady, and the necromancer declared that this way she would not be able to remove the curse from her son. The damned Duchess was sure that Simone needed to die right now, because if one more person died, everything would definitely work out. With the curse causing the world to gradually forget about Jace's existence, and with hope fading, the Duchess was ready to take a desperate step. Simone didn't know which dark magician had persuaded her, but she asked the Duchess to think about it. Dark magic couldn't save a person. It's as pointless as saying that a necromancer can bring a person back to life, and if the Duchess finds herself in a room full of corpses, she'll just end up dying. "Even if that hasn't happened yet," the necromancer shouted, "Jace is still a living person." And now he forgot that very moment when she needed to save him, while the Duke held the Duchess tightly in his arms. The necromancer placed a black magic amulet on the head of the cursed lady and declared that now she would finally be able to rest. The Duchess screamed in a frantic voice as soon as the magic amulet touched her body. The talisman, which was capable of driving out evil with even greater evil, was now in action. A dark, evil entity flew out of the cursed lady's mouth like a whirlwind, and Simone waited for all the evil to come out of her. All this time, the Duke held the lady while streams of dark magical energy flew out of her. The next second, she simply fell to the floor, her energy almost drained, and Simone asked the Duke to make sure she got enough rest. Now the necromancer was about to move on to the most important matter, saving the life of her cursed son. Standing near the pole with the tied man, she asked the Duke if this really was his son. His current state was definitely his fault, and the Duke did not lie and confessed. He said it happened about 7 years ago when something terrible happened to his son. It was at that time that his son Jason began to be forgotten by everyone because of the curse, and Floria's heart became very weak. As Simone had said earlier, a man arrived at the estate where the ducal family lived. He convinced his wife that he could remove the terrible curse, and his son would never suffer again. Their last hope was dark magic, so the Duke supported his wife, believing that they would succeed. The dark magician taught his wife some kind of dark magic for 10 days, and then disappeared without a trace. No one suspected that this was only the beginning of the worst nightmare that would have to be dealt with for many years. Floria began dragging living people and animals into her room, and even when the Duke begged her not to harm anyone, it was useless. It was as if she was intoxicated by dark magic and had absolutely no idea what she was doing. In fact, the Duke did not really try to convince her, because from that moment on he no longer saw her as his good wife. They both felt deep pain for their child, because he was erased from people's memories and doomed to a life worse than oblivion. After this, the situation did not improve at all, and when the Duke thought that he could no longer remain on the sidelines, Simone appeared at the mansion. According to the original story, Jace died because the Duchess and he were completely consumed by dark magic. 7 years on the brink of life and death, but the Duke believed that now everything would turn out differently. The curse was consuming the Duke's son, but he was still trying to live, which meant his desire was strong enough. At that moment, the necromancer asked Ren to open the box and get the magic stone. She took the scarlet stone in her hand and prepared to help the Duke's son, who seemed to have no more chances. For the necromancer, this was the most crucial moment, and with a flash of bright red eyes, she looked at her cursed son. She placed the magic stone directly on his chest and quietly said that the Duke's son would definitely survive. The room was filled with a purple glow. The necromancer's mana filled the magic stone with sacred energy. Simone believed that this should be enough to free Jace from this room, bound by dark power. The Duke's son already looked like a real corpse, and Simone applied the magic stone once again directly to his head so that the world could remember Jace again. In an instant his face changed, and before the Duke appeared the very beloved boy in whom he believed. It was no longer a dead man cursed by dark magic, but now an ordinary boy with blonde hair appeared before everyone. The curse had not yet been completely lifted, as the others still did not remember the young master. Before completing the ritual, he must be pulled out of this place, which is saturated with dark magic. And the necromancer warned that in order to completely remove the curse, a certain price would have to be paid. The Duke was ready to give anything to save his son and to save his family. He admitted that he was ready to give even his life so that his family could henceforth live a happy life, and the terrible curse would never touch them again. Simone smiled as soon as she heard that the Duke was ready to sacrifice even his only life. And if he's so willing to put her on the line, then there definitely shouldn't be any problems. Simone asked that the Archduchess and the young gentleman be laid separately from each other and that the magic stone be placed in his hand. For a full recovery, the stone must be held close for some time, but Simone didn't even notice that blood was still oozing from her palm. For some reason, she didn't use her power to heal the wound, and all her mana was given to removing the curse. Ren began to worry because the girl's bleeding did not stop and asked her to stand still. The Duke still could not believe that the curse on his family had really been lifted and that his son was alive. The gentleman thanked the necromancer for saving his beloved family, and from then on Simone became a special person to him. The Duke admitted that she was now a benefactor of their family, and the master truly trusted her. The next day, all the inhabitants of the mansion breathed a sigh of relief because the necromancer managed to save the ducal family. She had some things to sort out, and when the Duchess entered the room, she asked the maids to leave the premises. At last, the bright sun shone in this room, and life reigned here again. Madame Simone walked into the room with a huge axe, and the maid had no idea what she was going to do. Swinging with all her might, the frail girl swung the axe and struck the post to which the boy was tied. A wild roar echoed through the room, and the huge pillar shattered into small pieces all over the room. And now, finally, the main curse was finally over, but this was not the last thing Simone was going to deal with. The Duke had long since given his approval and warned all the maids to let the necromancer do what she wanted. He may have expected a completely different price for saving his family, but Simone did the right thing. He only asked that, when the lady had finished all her business, he clean up the Archduchess's chambers so that nothing would remain to remind her of the terrible past. The room was a complete mess, and Ren wanted to know if the girl was really going to destroy everything. All the objects in this room were not simple things that could be easily replaced. But to Simone, it was just old junk, and Ren agreed that perhaps there was some truth in her words. One way or another, the necromancer had caused a real pogrom, and she had to do what she had to do. Simone said that it was necessary to find and destroy the source of the curse, but after searching the entire room, she felt nothing. Since the Duchess was fueling the black magic curse, the necromancer should have sensed at least something and destroyed the item. That's why she decided to wreck the entire room, but she still couldn't find what she needed. Simone asked Ren. The Duke said that a dark magician had previously lived in this mansion. He did talk about it, but he didn't go into detail, and finally Simone understood what the mystery might be. The matter was not in the Duchess's room at all, and the item she needed was definitely not here. Simone, holding a huge axe in her hands, looked desperate and asked the maid where the room in which that very magician was staying was. The frightened lady replied that she knew nothing about it, but at that moment the butler decided to intervene. From now on, he completely trusted the necromancer and was ready to tell the whole truth, offering to show her that very room. That very room was not known to everyone, which is why the butler asked the girl to follow him. The servants did not know about the existence of the dark magician, and this was known only to a small circle of people. The butler explained that since dark magic was illegal, it could only ever be used in secret. If it becomes known that a mage practicing black magic has visited the cursed estate, this will stir up not only the residents, but also the servants. Therefore, the magician was allowed to live in the mansion and communicate only with the Archduchess for 10 days. The butler escorted the heroes to the very room in which the mysterious stranger lived. He forgot why the master had decided to give him this particular room, but he clearly remembered that the magician was very nervous. Simone was about to inspect the room, but she had no intention of smashing everything like she had in the Duchess's room. To begin with, she decided to look for something, and if she found anything suspicious, she asked that it be reported immediately. The heroes began to search for a dark magical object that needed to be destroyed as quickly as possible. None of them knew what was definitely worth looking for, so they tried to simply check everything. Simone would have immediately sensed dark magic, but so far the heroes could find absolutely nothing. Finally, she looked under the bed and saw something strange, tangible. It was that very object. In her hands was a large round sphere, and finally the necromancer joyfully declared that she had found it. It was definitely that dark magician's thing, and the girl had no doubts at all. She swung with all her might and was going to destroy the curse so that nothing like it would ever again remain in the estate. Without thinking, Simone threw the glass sphere on the floor, and its shards scattered across the room. The heroine was incredibly happy, because after the destruction of the magical object, the curse was finally lifted. She asked Ren to check the condition of the Duchess and Jason, and also to observe the butler's reaction. And if the curse has disappeared, the first thing that should happen is that his memory returns. Ren understood the lady's instructions perfectly and asked what she was going to do now that she had removed all the curses. The entire mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as the heavy veil of evil lifted, and the shadows that had once danced in the corners of the rooms retreated. The air was filled with a faint but noticeable scent of freshness, as if spring had burst into this oasis of death, and now the necromancer was about to have a good rest. And the next morning, an agitated Anna came to the lady and told her that she had heard something again that night. Probably some ghosts still lived in this place and continued to rage every night. Simone asked what the maid had heard this time, and the frightened Anna told her everything. Last night she heard that same knocking and banging, that sound that sends shivers down your spine. Kaylee came over and told them she had heard the same thing, and they couldn't mistake the sound for anything else. Someone was wandering through the corridors and making noise, and the necromancer hoped that she would at least be able to rest a little. As she thought, there would never be peace in this house, and she would have to deal with ghosts again. Every day something happened again in the estate. Strange sounds and voices were heard. Anna admitted that today she also heard a female voice that definitely did not belong to anyone she knew. In the silence of the room, it was clearly audible, and the voice asked strange questions, and the necromancer again became thoughtful. She asked if the cook hadn't said earlier that he had also heard a female voice, a ghost woman who repeats something as if she is searching and wanders around making noise all night. And the necromancer had heard this terrible story somewhere before in the world where she lived before. Simone realized that this ghost was now in the mansion, and this place seemed to attract various entities like a magnet. She decided to go straight to the Duke's office to tell him the new information. His Highness was not particularly busy, and asked Simone if something had happened in the mansion again. The necromancer said that she came about a strange noise that the servants hear every night. Since there was no information about this in the manual, she couldn't figure out how to deal with it. Looking at the girl, the Duke suggested that it seemed a new curse had appeared in the mansion, which no one had known about before. Something happened that had nothing to do with them, and Simone stared at the gentleman with surprised eyes. She understood that perhaps this had nothing to do with the Duke's mansion and his family, and that it was something unknown that came from outside. Suddenly, the very ghost that sat on the man's shoulder in the tavern appeared in the heroine's memory, and she clearly remembered it. Then the ghost suddenly disappeared, and the girl could not understand where he had disappeared to. The Duke asked Simone if anything was coming to mind, and at that moment a look of fear appeared on her face. He noticed that the lady had a thoughtful look, and she admitted that she definitely had one thought about it. But first, the necromancer decided to check everything herself, and promised that she would definitely tell the Duke about it afterwards. The health of the Duchess and Prince Jace improved, and the boy tried to keep the magic stone in his hands, but there was still little progress. Simone understood that the boy was recovering slowly, and given the strong curse, this was not a quick process. She asked the Duke to continue to look after him, while she herself was going to take care of other matters. It seems the necromancer won't be able to rest again, because now she needs to investigate a new case about an unknown ghost. The lady came out of the gentleman's office and was surprised because Ren was standing right in front of his door. She didn't understand what he was doing here, because today she certainly hadn't called him or given him any instructions. It was incredible, but the heroine got an employee who doesn't rest, even when asked. Ren said that the servants spoke of his suspicious noises that they hear at night, and many have already witnessed it. The young man considered this a big problem because he was sure that the ghost would continue to interfere with his work. He even offered to watch it at night, but Simone didn't understand why he was so desperate to help. She turned around and asked what would happen if, at night, he encountered the cause of the noise, which he definitely could not figure out on his own. Grabbing the hilt of the sword, Ren confidently declared that with this very sword he would deal with everyone. And he didn't understand why it wouldn't be possible to do the same as with the scarlet tree, but Simone admitted that she didn't know anything and hadn't encountered this herself yet. They say that lately the noise has been coming from the basement, so the best way to find out the cause is to see everything with your own eyes. The lady did not understand the young man's strange desire to learn about necromancers and oddities, as well as about lifting the curses of the imperial family, and she didn't hire a bodyguard at all, realizing that he would only prevent her from meeting the ghost. So the necromancer asked him to just wait and not poke his nose into other people's business. Just at that moment, the maid Anna was leaving the room, and the lady decided to address her. She asked to prepare a spare room in the basement, saying that she intended to stay there for the night. Anna was scared there could definitely be monsters in the basement, but the necromancer came here to solve such problems. Ren turned to the lady and suggested that while her room was being prepared, it would probably be necessary to meet with the cook. They say that recently he became silent and very frightened, and the young man heard from the servants that the necromancer was going to talk to him. She was surprised by his strange persistence, because Ren even offered to go with her. The heroes went to the kitchen to ask the cook about what he might have heard in recent days. The man was so scared that as soon as he heard voices in the kitchen, he didn't notice how he screamed in surprise. Upon seeing the guests, the cook admitted that Madame Simone had frightened him incredibly, and he certainly had not expected her appearance. Simone admitted that she would have liked to talk a little, but it turned out that the chef was too busy at the moment. She couldn't notice that the man looked terrible and his face was completely pale, as if he was constantly being stalked by someone. Simone asked the cook to tell her about the noise he had witnessed and whether he had heard anything else since then. But as soon as the man heard her question, his face seemed to become even paler and more frightened. He even dropped the ladle from his hands and admitted that all this time he had indeed been haunted by strange sounds. And the cook understood perfectly well that if the necromancer came to ask about this, it meant that another ghost had appeared in the estate again. The man heard strange sounds every day, but trembling all over, he admitted that this was not all. In fact, he had recently seen something terrible, and where a face should have been, there were only the blue, swollen legs of a ghost. Recently, he managed to meet him, and the frightened cook told him that something terrible was looking at him with dozens of hellish eyes, and this meant that the very ghost that Simone was thinking about somehow appeared in the cursed mansion.